Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Kid Naruto was trained by Gojo Satoru and unleashed infinity at age 8? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Finger Snap Between Worlds. The night the air learned to hesitate, Naruto sat on the swing outside the academy and counted the creak between each sway. He liked the way the chain complained. It meant the village was quiet enough to listen. Street lamps pooled warm light across the packed dirt, and moths jittered in their soft circles. Konoha had settled. Vendors' calls had thinned to yawns and shudders, somewhere. A dog argued with the moon. Naruto dragged a toe through dust and drew a smiley face with hair that stuck out like his. He drew a second one beside it, just in case the first got lonely. The breeze shifted. Leaves fell from the academy's eaves and slowed like they'd remembered something mid-drop. The moths' wings kept beating, but each flap slid through molasses. Naruto blinked, leaned forward, and saw it. A leaf hovering at eye level, its serrated edge crisp enough to touch, except his fingertip wouldn't cross the last sliver of air. It was as if the space between him and the leaf had turned stubborn. A man stood in the middle of the path where no one had been. Tall, white hair like chalk snapped clean, a blindfold wrapped around his eyes. He had the posture of one who trusted the world to get out of his way. The leaves hung around him in a lazy halo. "Hey," the man said, cheerful, like he'd found a vending machine giving free candy. "You ever make the wind hold its breath?" Naruto's hand hovered near the leaf. "No," he said, because honesty was faster than bluffing, and this man felt like he would see through lies like smoke. "Want to learn a party trick?" the man asked. Naruto squinted. "What's a party?" "Something you deserve more of," the man said, and then he walked closer, and every step rang in Naruto's ears even though he wasn't loud, he was simply there too much. He tapped two fingers together near Naruto's face and made a small clicking sound with his tongue. The leaf bobbed and settled gently onto Naruto's outstretched finger. Naruto stared at it. He grinned without meaning to. "How'd you do that?" The man tilted his head. "Trade secret." "What's your name?" "Uzumaki Naruto," Naruto said, then repeated, louder, in case the moths needed introducing to the future Hokage. "Uzumaki Naruto. The man tasted the syllables. "Good shape for a name." "I'm Gojo." Naruto whispered a small voice in the back of his skull, like the scrape of claws on old stone. "Do not trust the blindfolded one." Naruto blinked hard until the fox's voice sank into its usual grumble. The man with the blindfold, Gojo, knelt until they were almost the same height. No grown-up got that close to his face unless they were telling him to stop doing something. Gojo didn't smell like smoke or sake. He smelled like cold and something like chalk dust. "Want to see something cooler?" he asked. Naruto glanced at the academy windows, shadowed rectangles. At the swing. At the leaf on his finger that had obeyed him for the first time in his life. He nodded. Gojo walked him to the training yard. The ground was stamped with the feet of 100 students. The dummies wore bruises like ugly sashes. Gojo picked up a rock the size of his fist, turned it over, and tossed it up. It rose, slowed, and hovered with the lazy insistence of a dream that refused to end. Naruto reached up. His fingers met air that felt sticky. Not wet, not thick, just unwilling. "It's not the rock that's special," Gojo said, as the stone spun slowly in place. "It's the distance between you and everything else. Most people forget distance is a choice." Naruto didn't understand, and he hated not understanding. He scowled at the rock. "Make it come to me." "Make" is a little aggressive, Gojo said. "Ask, decide. You're good at deciding, aren't you?" "Yeah," Naruto said without humility. He pressed his palm forward and tightened his face until the world sharpened and his breath quivered. He couldn't push the air, it pushed back. He angled his hand, as if moving around a stubborn adult in a hallway. His palm slipped through. The rock slid the last centimeter and booped him on the hand. Naruto laughed out loud at the ridiculous tenderness of it. The world had always been one piece, one unbroken rude hull. For a heartbeat, it had seams. "Okay," he said breathlessly. "Okay, do it again." Hungry, murmured the fox, is what this trick will make you. But there was curiosity in the dark. They stayed until the street lamps clicked off and the moths realized they had been lied to by the night. Gojo showed him a dozen ways to place his hand in the world. Fingers splayed, 2 fingers together, palm open. He gave him no lectures, no charts, just a rhythm. A way of breathing that felt like watching a rainstorm from under a porch roof where you didn't get wet. When Naruto's hands shook, Gojo stopped. He let the rock drop into his palm and tucked it into Naruto's vest pocket like a favor. You can come back tomorrow, Gojo said. I'll be around. Are you a ninja? Naruto asked. Different school, Gojo said, standing and stretching until joints popped. Same homework. Keep your leaf. Naruto glanced at his finger. The leaf had fallen somewhere without his permission. He lifted his chin anyway. I'm going to be Hokage, he said. If you teach me, I'll use it right. Gojo grinned in a way that felt like standing at the edge of a roof about to jump. I'm counting on it. He turned and walked toward the gate, and the air remember how to be fast. Naruto sat on the packed dirt and tried to make the rock wobble without touching it. It didn't. He gritted his teeth and tried again and met only ordinary night. When he finally staggered home, he knew 2 things. The world could be convinced to be kind for a second, and he would be back. Konoha, by morning, had the smell of miso and damp straw. Naruto's stomach tried to crawl out of his body to chase the street food vendors, but he had a mission: find the man with the blindfold. He didn't need to. Word of something weird spread faster than fire in a market. By the time he reached the training fields, a small crowd had gathered, older genin whispering, a chunin with a scar across the nose pretending not to stare. Gojo stood at the center of a cleared circle, hands in his pockets, listening to a jonin explain politely that Konoha had rules about outsiders in training areas. I love rules, Gojo said brightly. They're so fun to jump over. You'll file your presence with the Hokage, the jonin said, syllables clipped. I'll let him know, Gojo said, which was not the same thing. The jonin frowned and flicked his eyes at Naruto. Naruto scowled back, then lifted his hand. Can I? Naruto started. Of course, Gojo said, without asking what. Start with the feeling when someone pats your head and you don't want them to. That exact too close. Find it. Then put it where you want. Naruto thought of the market lady who swatted his fingers when he pressed them against her glass jar full of candy. He thought of the tired look civilians gave him when his name came up and of how the air itself sometimes felt stale around that look, hard to breathe through. He made that air. He held it between himself and the world like a shield and then softened it, because he had decided it would not stop the people he liked. A leaf from the training post's splintered top drifted down and stalled. Then slid around his shoulder as if running a finger along a ledge. The crowd muttered. The jonin's mouth flattened. Gojo lifted his arms like a conductor. You say, people, he's negotiating with space. Super normal. Believe in yourself. Eat your vegetables. Naruto beamed despite the fox's low, skeptical murmur. The warmth from the success made him brave. He turned to the nearest person, Tenten. A girl from the weapon shop who sometimes practiced here with a seriousness that turned everything shined and sharp, and said, Want to try something? Tenten had a strip of cloth around her forehead to keep sweat from her eyes. She jolted at being addressed in front of an audience, then tilted her head, bemused. Try what, exactly? Throw something at me, Naruto said. Naruto, the jonin warned. It's fine, Gojo said. Within reason. Nothing explosive. No poison. No giant swords. We'll save the giant swords for later. Tenten looked at Gojo, then at Naruto, then at the weight of attention pressing down on the circle. She rolled her eyes like she was agreeing to humor a bossy cousin and pulled a kunai from her pouch. Don't cry if it grazes your ear. Naruto held up his hand. I don't want it to touch me, he said, and meant it without fear. But I want to feel how close it gets. Tenten flicked her wrist. The kunai flew end over end. Naruto watched the spin and the silver. He breathed once. And the kunai slowed like someone had stuck it in honey. He held his hand steady and coaxed the air into that almost touch. The kunai floated a thumb's width from his palm, quivering. The murmurs changed pitch. Not contempt this time. Something else. Tenten's eyebrows went up. Her mouth did a sort of grudging curve. Okay, she said, satisfied in the way people get at clean cuts. That's cool. Permission. Gojo said conversationally, so only Naruto could hear. You're not just telling the world. No. You're telling it. You may, here, now, or, you may not. Small doors instead of walls. Doors, Naruto repeated, and tucked the idea into his chest like it was something he could wear on bad days. He let the kunai go. It dropped point first and stuck in the dirt, ringing a little against a small stone. Naruto leaned to pick it up and remembered not to be rude, so he nodded to Tenten and held it out properly, handle first. She took it carefully. The tip was clean. You stopped it dead, she said. Not dead, Naruto said. I just told it to quit it. The crowd broke up slowly. The Jonin wandered off with a sigh and the air of someone making a mental note to write a report he didn't want to write. When Naruto looked back to Gojo, the man had a folded paper in one hand and was doodling a smiling face in the margin of what looked suspiciously like official paperwork. He flicked the paper shut when Naruto peered, but not fast enough for Naruto to miss the Hokage's seal. Gojo winked. Blindfolded, the wink was just a tilt of the head and mischief in the mouth. Field trip, he said. Ready. Naruto's stomach dropped and bounced. Now. Best time, Gojo said. Also, worst time, same thing. They left the training field by way of rooftops. Gojo never seemed to jump. He just decided to be where he wanted to go and was there, a beat late and yet exactly on time. Naruto's steps were still loud and honest. His sandals slapped clay tiles. He tucked the sound behind his teeth and followed. They stopped at the old well near the eastern wall, the one that had been boarded up 2 winters ago when a boy dropped a bucket and 3 drunks tried to fish it out and nearly fished themselves into a funeral. Gojo popped the lid with 2 fingers, peered into the darkness, and said, conversationally, "Do you trust me?" Naruto stood on his toes and looked in. Water glimmered far down. "I don't know you," he said. "So, no. Perfect." Gojo caught him by the back of the vest and rolled him into the hole. The dark rose up with the kind of speed that would have made him scream. Naruto's breath grabbed his throat. And then all the training charades and the leaf and the kunai and the boy who drew a second smiley face so the first wouldn't be lonely crashed together into a single decision. Will this hurt me? No. The world relented. The fall slowed into a firm slide. Naruto's stomach still leapt around rudely, but he didn't smash into stone. He hovered 2 meters above the W.8er like a dragonfly that had decided to cheat gravity for a moment out of boredom. Very nice. Gojo's voice drifted from above, amused and echoing. But your footwork is terrible. I'm in a well, Naruto said, shaky with adrenaline and laughter. I don't think I need footwork. You always need footwork, Gojo said. Make your breath the floor. It was too weird to be fake. Naruto tried. He inhaled slow enough to make his head ache. Visualized air sliding down his throat into his stomach like an obedient sheet. He pushed against it, made it an invisible platform, and set his bare feet on it in his mind. His body understood second. He rose half an inch, steadier. Good, Gojo called. Now, let go. Claim again. Do it on purpose, not panic. Naruto swallowed. He let the floor vanish and dropped with a jerk that snagged his heart. He told the world again, this will not hurt me. The world argued. He insisted. The air thickened. He didn't smash his face on black. He floated. He did it again, and again. Until he could drop and stop without thinking about the drop or the stop, only the choice. When he came up sodden and laughing, Gojo hauled him by his vest and set him on the ground like a fish being measured. Naruto coughed and spat well water and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. You could have killed me, he said, deadpan. Not with your luck, Gojo said. He ruffled Naruto's hair with casual affection. Then paused a fraction of a second. Unless I miscalculated. In which case, oops. Naruto swatted at his hand because it was expected, because that's how you keep the world saws. UAL when someone tries to put their fingerprints on your heart. Gojo took the swat like it was his due. Naruto found that he didn't mind, not exactly. They ate dango in the shade near the wall. Gojo moved his blindfold to pinch a splinter out of his finger and Naruto saw eyes too bright to be polite, summer sky soaked in lightning. He almost looked away. He didn't. Gojo covered them again. People are going to try to take you apart. He said. no longer smiling. Not because you're special, because you're convenient. Don't let them. Naruto chewed and made a face. Take me apart how? Paper seals, promises, fear. Gojo said lightly, as if listing ingredients for soup. All the adult favorites. So, Naruto said, licking sugar from his thumb, don't trust anyone. Trust lots of people, Gojo said. Just not the ones who insist on it. Who do I insist on? Naruto asked. Yourself, Gojo said, and the ones who laugh even when it's expensive. Naruto snorted. You're weird. Obviously, Gojo said, content. Konoha noticed him. Not the way it had always noticed him, as an ache behind its eyes. This was noisier, a series of small tests wrapped in politeness. An Anbu appeared on a balcony bead smooth and silent. A beast mask tilted in a way that was supposed to be neutral and was only almost. Naruto stayed on the alley's edge and pretended to count change, just to see how long it would take. The Anbu didn't attack, he let the waiting bend. He was learning to hear the space around people's patience. The attack came a week later, not from Anbu, but from men who moved with the dead. Precise cadence of a unit that thought of themselves as a solution. Root didn't bother with masks in the narrow corridor behind the archives, they wore anonymity like a uniform. Naruto had gone, either because he liked the trapped smell of paper, because the kunoichi at the front desk was nice to him when she thought no one noticed, because he wanted to see if the air between shelves listened differently than the air outside. It did. It was USTY and full of old whispers. He was thinking about whether he could slow a falling book to an inch per hour and leave it like that forever to confuse someone. When the corridor muffled itself, Uzumaki Naruto, said the lead root operative. His voice had no edges to catch on. Come quietly. Naruto stared at him and felt the fox stir and howl. He let the voice run by like a stream and stepped aside. That line ever work for you? Two moved at once, one for his shoulder, one for his mouth. Naruto let infinity breathe. Hands stopped a hair from skin. The second root's fingers hung inches from his lips. Naruto watched his own breath bounce and fold against an invisible cushion. Interesting, said the leader, like you might say about a bug that refused to die under your boot. He raised a palm. The paper on it had a seal drawn in careful circles. Don't let that touch you, said a voice somewhere above Naruto's instincts. Gojo's voice. The memory of it, at least. Naruto was already deciding to dodge. He didn't move backward. He stepped forward, between the stretched hands, and the corridor smeared. He had discovered that he could schlee his body along the boundary where the world said no, and it let him slip like soap. The leader's palm swept past the back of Naruto's head and hit the masked man's chest instead. The paper slapped cloth. The seal flared. The masked man rattled like a jar of bolts and crumpled. The leader didn't apologize. He didn't look. He reached for another seal. Naruto felt the pressure of a third man behind him in the corner where two shelves met like a tight throat. He exhaled and let his mind draw a map and walk it. The corridor became a little funhouse he didn't own but could flirt with. The root operative to his left lunged and then slowed, until his motion became a decision Naruto could edit. Naruto shifted. The man's blade nicked the air in front of Naruto's cheek and stayed there, shivering politely. Naruto tilted his chin and looked past the stopped steel at the man's eyes. I don't want you to die, Naruto said. But you're being very annoying. He edged the blade sideways with the flat of his hand. Not touching it, just pushing on the air around it, and the blade complied like it had learned manners. Naruto slid along the wall and sprinted. 2 steps. 3. He his own permission and felt the world hug him too tight as he ricocheted down the corridor like a pinball. Enough, someone said, and the taste of tobacco leaf filled the space, warm, familiar. The Hokage's voice was smoke that kept fires where they were supposed to be. Stand down. The root operatives halted with the hatred of men who would prefer a clean order to a complicated one. The lead crumpled the seal in his hand and tucked it into his sleeve. Naruto slowed infinity so the Hokage could approach without bouncing like a moth off a lantern. Hiruzen Sarutobi had lines that weren't from age. They were from listening too hard to too many lies. He gave Naruto the look of a grandfather who wanted to scold and a commander who couldn't afford to. Are you hurt? Hiruzen asked. No, Naruto said, and tried not to feel the shaky laughter in his bones. They're bad at asking nicely. Hiruzen sighed. Yes, he said. They are. He turned his head a fraction, just enough for the root tea. Oh, feel his gaze as weather rather than bullets. Return to your commander, he said mildly. The leader hesitated. The hesitation was small. It mattered. He pivoted and left without saluting. The body of the downed operative stirred. He would live. Hiruzen watched them go until the corridor remembered its dust. He looked down at Naruto. Walk with me. They exited into late afternoon, the village dipped in gold where shadows made corners interesting. Naruto put his hands behind his head like he wasn't a bit keyed up. Hiruzen didn't reach to ruffle his hair. He had learned not to do that to this boy without permission. I hear you've acquired a teacher, Hiruzen said, as if discussing the weather. He acquired me, Naruto said, then because he could not help himself, is he allowed? Hiruzen's mouth fought a smile. He is, a complication the village cannot ignore. He's as dangerous as he is useful. He considered Naruto, measuring, not weighing. So are you. I'm not dangerous, Naruto said automatically. You are to people who want you small, Hiruzen said. Naruto's chest squeezed. He decided not to answer that in case words made it heavy. They passed a woman closing up her produce stand, stacking oranges like small suns. Hiruzen bought 2 with money he didn't count. He handed one to Naruto. You will receive more attention now, he said. Some of it ugly. Give none of it free rent. I can charge, Naruto said, biting into the orange until juice stung a cut on his lip he hadn't noticed. You can ignore, Hiruzen said. Or you can be so undeniable it doesn't matter. Naruto looked at him. Which do you do? I'm old, Hiruzen said dryly. I nap. They separated at the corner. The orange oil on Naruto's fingers floated a second longer than it should have when he flicked his hand, winking in the light. He walked home with a feeling in his stomach like the first drop on a good roller coaster, dread and joy sharing a seat and pretending they were strangers. Training built not like a tower but like a bridge. Some days it was a single board laid across nothing, some days a span of stone where he could run and not look down. Gojo taught him by accident, on purpose. He tripped Naruto mid-sprint and watched how he recovered. He told terrible jokes in the middle of balance exercises. He asked questions that were more like dares. Can you stop the rain? No. Can you stop one drop and let the rest do their thing? Maybe. Can you stop a person and let their jacket keep going? That's mean. Right answer. He never said chakra. He never said cursed anything. He said distance, decision, permission. He said doors. Naruto said them back until they were less lessons than moves in an argument he was having with gravity. Hinata found him at dusk one evening, by the river where the water flattened into glass before the falls. She did not sneak. She just walked softly because that was how she walked. Naruto didn't pretend he hadn't heard. He liked that she didn't require pretending. You move different, she said, voice a small heat. Her eyes were milk clear with Byakugan. She watched things no one else could. I move the same, Naruto said. The space moves different. He flicked his finger over the water without touching it and made a ripple that took its time. He grinned. Watch. She watched. He felt her gaze like a second set of hands placed gently on his shoulders to steady him. He liked the shape of it. Not possessive. Not greedy. Just there. Can I? She touched her fingers together. Try to touch your sleeve. Naruto considered. He'd be practicing letting people through without making it dangerous. He'd let Tenten hand him a tool once without the bruising lag. He'd let Hiruzen pat his cheek and make a joke about whiskers. He was getting good at doors. Okay, he said. I'll open it here. He tapped the air near his elbow and visualized a circle he'd cut to let someone through and no one else. He held it steady, breath tight for a second, then easy. Hinata reached. Her fingers brushed fabric. He felt it when she touched him. He felt the air close again a moment later, gentle, like a kiss on the back of a hand. Hinata's eyes widened. She smiled, small and unpracticed, and it made his chest feel hot. That was, she said, then laughed at herself for having no word. Thank you for letting me. Yeah, Naruto said, suddenly. Desperate for something to do with his mouth that wasn't say another stupid thing. No problem. They stood like that for a minute with the rear combing itself flat and the falls loud enough to leave conversations alone. Hinata finally said, "Your defense, it looks like a bubble, but it's edges. Threads. I can see that. You choose." Naruto pointed at her. "You're the first person who said it like that." He wanted Gojo there only so he could elbow him and say, "See, I'm not the only one who speaks weird." Hinata pushed her hair behind her ears so it would stop thinking it could fall forward and save her from eye contact. "If you need someone to watch for gaps, I can." The fox stirred in the cage of his ribs, a flutter of hot breath through bars. Naruto didn't feed it anger. He fed it the thought of someone at his side who saw edges too. The fox snorted, unimpressed, but it did not claw. "Yeah," Naruto said, "that would help." She nodded like he had just let her do something huge, when all he had said was a word. The market scuffle that made half the street think twice about spitting when Naruto passed began the way trouble likes to begin, with a debt. A small one, held by a small man who thought scale was dignity. He had hired muscle with bored eyes to help him look tall. They were shaking a butcher by his apron strings because they had an audience and the meat was fresh. Naruto would have kept walking if the butcher's little boy hadn't been there with a broom, doing the thing children do when adults break the room, cleaning around them because it's something to hold. "Hey," Naruto said, stepping into the circle like a dumb rich kid into a puddle. "You're going to make the sausages taste like ego." The small man blinked. "Who? Doesn't matter," Naruto said cheerfully. "You see, and leave or you can get bored trying to hit me. Those are your options." One of the hired men, who had the square hands and slow pupils of someone who had built a life around taking orders that let him ignore the part where he was a person, swung. Naruto raised a hand and let infinity do the most mundane trick it had, opposing stubbornness with politeness. The fist slowed. It stopped a finger's width from Naruto's nose. He touched the air between skin and skin with his fingertip, brushing a distance as if it were a fabric he could stroke. "See," he said to the boy with the broom. "No blood in the meat." The other thug lunged at Naruto's legs. Naruto stepped and dropped the permission near his calf so the grab closed on air. He took a breath and placed a small, bright no on the ground 2 inches in front of the thug's big toe. The man tripped over that nothing and fell, which made the audience laugh. Laughter turns scenes. The hired muscle flushed the color of people who realize they can bleed. The small man fumbled a paper from his sleeve. The ink on it glinted wetly. Naruto recognized the precise circles from the archive corridor in the root leader's hand. A cousin of that seal. Not the same. Root wasn't the only group with hobbies. Naruto's heartbeat spiked, and his field spiked with it. The air prickled and stung like cold rain. He took 2 quick breaths and flattened the spike into a sheet. He didn't want to hurt anybody who wasn't on purpose trying to hurt a kid with a broom. "Don't," he said to the small man, almost sorry. The small man slapped the paper toward Naruto's chest. Naruto used blue for the first time outside of training. Not much. He was careful. He took what the world wanted to do anyway, the tendency of things to slide into lowest energy, and he gave it a little bribe. The paper shot past him as if the air leaned. It smacked the doorpost beside the butcher's head and stuck. The seal flared, hungry, and ate a splinter of wood. The doorframe sagged. The butcher yelped. The little boy breathed in and held the breath like he wanted to save it. "I said don't," Naruto told the small man, less sorry. The hired muscle, realizing magic words would not fix them, went for a knife. The boy with the broom squeaked. Naruto, without ceremony, plucked the world by a thread only he could see and tugged. The knife changed its mind about trajectories and veered into the post, pinning the small man's sleeve. He squealed, which didn't help his dignity. Naruto felt the tug in his shoulders like he'd hauled a bucket. He hadn't thrown the knife. He'd simply convinced it to fall differently. And that was heavier, somehow. "Leave," Naruto said, and did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He let the silence between words fill with what he could do next. They left like men walking backward out of a temple to pretend they weren't retreating. People stared, some with the tight outrage that meant they were waiting to be given permission to hate. Some with a badly hidden relief that looked like shame. The butcher ruffled his son's hair and swallowed hard. "Thank you," he said, not meeting Naruto's eyes, because manners can be learned in the wrong direction. Sausage, Naruto said, deciding to save the man from the debt of gratitude before it accumulated interest. 1. The spicy one. The butcher half laughed. He cut a link with hands that shook. He wrapped it in paper and then in more paper because he wanted to. He handed it to Naruto like an apology, like a gift, like a thing he wished he could make mean less and more at the same time. Naruto tucked the sausage under his arm and walked away before the moment could calcify into a story the villagers told themselves about themselves that might not make room for him. He found Gojo leaning on a fence like a tourist. Blindfold tilted up to rest on his forehead. Those eyes again. They caught light and drank it and returned it improved. You did the thing, Gojo said, pleased. I did the thing, Naruto said, exhausted and giddy and pretending he was none of those. He held up the sausage like a trophy. Also, lunch. Let me guess, Gojo said. You were, in fact, extremely responsible and restrained. And nobody died of embarrassment except the fellow with the good paper. Naruto pretended to think. Mostly. Gojo's grin softened into something almost like pride and almost like a dare to try to make him admit it out loud. Told you. Distance is a choice. Naruto's knees wobbled now that it was safe to let them. Gojo saw and didn't say anything. He sprung the latch on the fence. And they sat with their legs on the wrong side like schoolkids. Your field spiked, Gojo said after Naruto had devoured 2 bites. Yeah, Naruto said, around sausage. Got mad. Emotions are expensive, Gojo said. Spend them like weapons, not like confetti. Sometimes confetti is a weapon, Naruto said. In the right crowd. Gojo choked on a laugh. You, he said, are going to be a problem. Naruto elbowed him, careful to open a tiny door first. Permission. Door. He was getting good at it. You could build a life out of doors. The third time Root tried, they brought paperwork, witnesses. And a man who spoke as if he was doing everyone a favor. Naruto let him talk in circles under the Hokage's window and only interrupted to be annoying by design. Can we not do this, he said finally. If you want to throw seals. We can go to a field and throw seals. The man blinked like a lizard. This is not a negotiation. Everything's a negotiation, Naruto said, and looked at Hiruzen with his chin rigid. Because it's hard to be 12 and also be your own lawyer and also be reasonable. I want a mission. You are not ready, said the Root man, so smooth it almost worked like a bomb. Naruto smiled like someone had lit a fuse at the tip of his tongue. You don't know me. Hiruzen pinched the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers and made a noise like someone trying to remember a joke and failing. AC rank, then. He said. Wave country. The Root man opened his mouth. Hiruzen raised a hand without looking at him. The hand was papery and old and full of a kind of power that didn't look like it should work and did anyway. Go, Hiruzen told Naruto. Prove me right. Naruto bowed. Not deep or delicate, just a bump of gratitude, and almost ran to get his pack. He stopped at the door like he'd been tripped by memory and turned back. Hey, he said, to no one in particular and to 2 someones. I need help with tools. And with seeing gaps. Hinata, who had been standing in he shadow of a support pillar like she could become architecture if it would give her a minute, flushed under her hood. Yes, she said, immediate, before he had figured out how to frame it as a favor that was not a favor. Tenten snorted from where she leaned against the wall, chewing a toothpick because some days people needed props to remember their mouths. You mean you want me to design a toy that can ride your snot bubble without popping it? Naruto blinked. Yes. Tenten grinned, sharp and delighted. Finally something fun. Don't call it a snot bubble, Naruto said, but he didn't really mean it. Tenten pushed off the wall and walked up to him, close, bold. Here's the deal. I throw stupid at you until I find the shape of it. You open a door when I tell you, exactly when I tell you. You mess up, I lose a tool. I cry. You buy me dumplings. Naruto has no money, Hinata said, poker dry. I'll steal from Gojo, Naruto said. Gojo. Appearing, how? Naruto refused to learn, behind Hiru's En's chair and making the Hokage not jump by power of good breeding alone, said, I accept this robbery. Hiruzen didn't sigh because he was out of size. If the four of you are finished drafting your comedy act, pack your bags. Kakashi will meet you at dawn. Teamwork, Gojo said brightly. That's my favorite word after free samples. Hiruzen made the face of a man who had, indeed, napped too little. They met on the training field at the rim of morning, the sky a pale coin trying to decide which side to land on. Kakashi showed up 5 minutes late with an eye smile and a paper bag of onigiri that he refused to share on principle until Sakura kicked his calf and he relented. Sasuke was cool the way boys are when they're holding a piece of glass that has cut them and they've decided to clench around it instead of put it down. Sakura was sharp and brave and very tired of being dismissed. Naruto had expected the usual shuffle of introductions and insults. Instead, Kakashi's gaze shleed to him and went steady in a way that meant this was not going to be an ordinary outing. You're bringing a shadow guard on AC rank? Kakashi asked the air at Naruto's left shoulder, where Gojo was only hypothetically lounging. Not a guard, Gojo said cheerfully. A concerned parent. Ah, Kakashi said. And have you met our village's concerned grandparents? Several, Gojo said. They tried to tattoo my kid. Kakashi's eye crinkled. Yes, he said. They do that. Chizuna arrived with the clink of glass and wine on his breath and lies in his pockets. He looked Naruto over and made a face. That said he had expected muscle and got a mouth. Naruto smiled kindly at him and decided to be extremely competent in front of him for sport. They took the road at a pace that felt like it had somewhere to be. Naruto kept his field low, like a breath under a shirt. Hinata walked half a step to his right, always where he could see her and where she could see what he could not. Tenten had a new toy in her hands, a wire on a spool that hummed faintly, the paper tags along it marked with little tidy sigils. Ready? She asked without looking at him. Ready, Naruto said. Door, she said. He opened one near his shoulder. She flicked the line. It zipped through the window without snagging and wrapped around a tree branch 2 meters away. Tenten tugged. The line held. She grinned. We're going to do terrible things, she said happily. Only to people who deserve it, Hinata murmured. Obviously, Tenten said. I'm not a villain. I'm working on it, Naruto said. He didn't have to wait long to practice restraint. The demon brothers struck where roads bend to hide intentions, bladed gauntlets flashing with the confidence of men who love their own entrance. Naruto didn't walk in front. He didn't charge. He stepped sideways and made a corridor of air, narrow, tight as a throat. The first brother's chain swung and slowed and then slipped through the small permission he'd given it to go the wrong way and wrap around the second brother's ankles. They fell into each other with a grunt that sounded like they were tired of being themselves. Sakura darted in and had them bound with crisp efficiency before anyone could act surprised. Kakashi's voice didn't change when he said, very good. Chizuna stared at Naruto outright, no manners left. Naruto bounced the stare back at him with the soft elasticity of someone used to it and now too busy for it. They kept moving. The air ahead had the feel of a lake with something under it. Naruto could sense pressure now when he paid attention. He didn't know what he was sensing. He didn't need to. He wanted Gojo to say something irreverent and precise, but Gojo had vanished, because Gojo trusted him to do this without a hand on his back. The giant sword came first. It spun end over end with the arrogance of an object that had been named and carried like a friend. Naruto didn't slow it. Kakashi caught it with a fingertip on the handle like a man greeting an old joke. Zabuza Momochi stepped onto the path with mist around his calves and disdain for scenery. When he smiled, it did not reach anything important. Sasuke tensed. Sakura shifted her weight to cover Chizuna. Naruto lifted his hand, and the air listened harder. Kids, Zabuza said, disgust in his mouth like a bit of fruit he had bitten into expecting sweet and finding rot. You let children guard a drunk. Kakashi's eye crinkled. Children, he said, and a headache. Zabuza vanished into mist. The sword vanished with him. An instant later water collapsed around Naruto the heavy suddenness of a hand over a mouth. The sphere locked him up to his shoulders, a prison made of too much of a good thing. He tasted iron and his own panic. He did what Gojo had made him do 20 times in a well. He made his breath the floor. He stepped on it. The water couldn't crush him if he prevented it from reaching him, and he had decided to keep his own air. He didn't try to blow the prison apart. He set his palm against its inside, not touching, and gave it a place it wanted to go. A low spot, a hollow, a tiny lean toward a pull. Blue kissed the water, coaxed it into rush-in. G threw a manufactured point of emptiness. The prison shuddered. Naruto ducked and slid out through the flaw like a fish through a crack in a net. Kakashi was there an instant later, no luck involved, only skill. The fight ballooned. Zabuza's blade made statements. Kakashi answered with water that had learned manners. Sasuke and Sakura protected Tazuna with the tidy ugliness of people doing work that needs doing. Zabuza flicked his fingers and needles flashed. They fanned toward Kakashi, efficient, meant to kill a moment, not a man. Naruto pulled blue in a thin ribbon across the needles, path, not to swallow them, but to yank their angle. They struck a trunk and trembled like bees on a string. Zabuza's head canted. He seemed to see Naruto for the first time with the part of his brain that mattered. What are you? Little problem. Naruto bared his teeth like a fox that has learned the hollows of its own cage and begun to count the screws. A choice, he said. Zabuza laughed, and it was a decent laugh, blunt and not cruel. Liar, he said, and vanished again. The mist thickened. Hinata's voice came from Naruto's right, calm under the edge of fast, 2 meters. Hi, opening. Now. Naruto opened the door where she said. Tenten's line hissed through and wrapped around a branch above a crouched silhouette. She yanked. The branch bent. The silhouette dropped with a curse. Kakashi's A. NKLE snapped up in a lazy flick and met a throat with precision that indicated no malice, only work. Zabuza slid out of visibility like a bad idea sacked back into the closet. Enough showing off, Kakashi said, though his voice had a smile tucked into the fold. We move. They moved across 100 small choices. A puddle skirted, a rabbit knot mistaken for a trap, a child's toy returned to the D. Itch it had rolled into rather than pocketed. Naruto tasted the copper penny of adrenaline less and less as the day wore on. His field no longer stabbed, it softened, it became a part of the weather he wore. He lay on his back under a sparse roof of stars that night, the little fire sifting sparks like bored fairies. Sakura had taken first watch because everyone else pretended not to argue about it and she hated being coddled. Sasuke slept on his side like people who have learned to make themselves thin even on flat ground. Tenten muttered in her sleep, counting knots. Hinata breathed carefully, as if she could train that too. Naruto stared up and listened to the fox berate him for not taking every opportunity to crush his enemies beneath heel. I don't want to crush, he whispered toward the sky. I want to win. It's different. Quote. The fox snorted. You are very young. I'm learning, Naruto said. He slept like people do when the world is finally a pillow instead of a fist. They are of. Eden wave with salt on their tongues and a taste of rot under the sweetness. Poverty makes a sound, a tin crinkle in the way a place uses its light, in the way the people only look up when they have already decided it cannot be helped walking. Chizuna's house held warmth that had survived on stubbornness and a daughter's spine. Tsunami put bowls in front of them and dared them to say thank you like beggars instead of guests. She wouldn't appreciate pity. Naruto respected that. Inari glared. It was proper glare, sourced from grief, poorly disguised as disdain because disdain is easier. Naruto let the boy's look slide off his field. Not in contempt, just in practicality. Some blows are invitations you don't accept. They built a day out of small helping. Naruto lifted beams with the kind of muse. Clee that has nothing to do with strength. He convinced nails to enter wood more politely. He left windows in his field where Chizuna's muddy boot could brush his calf without that weird delay that made people shiver. He practiced making doors for the dog. The dog was thrilled. They trained at dusk. Kakashi was flint dry in his instructions. Sasuke refined his edges. Sakura refined her aim. Tenten tested a new anchor on Naruto's field and wrote notes in a blocky hand on old receipt paper. Hinata mapped his edges and hummed under her breath in a way that gave his chest the idea of quiet. Gojo did not appear. Naruto pretended he didn't look for him. The pretending was almost good. On the third day, fog came up the river like a muscle flexed. Naruto stood on the bridge and the world narrowed to the width of his breath. Zabuza's laugh walked out of the wet. Mirrors sprouted ice and menace. Needles hummed. Kakashi cursed, familiar with mirrors in ways Naruto wasn't. Haku's silhouette stepped into a frame of cold and did not belong to Zabuza the way a sword belongs to a man. She belonged to purpose and good hands wasted. Naruto learned 3 things very quickly. 1. His red blew too much space out of the way. 2. Terror made his field spiky and choked his friends. 3. Mercy had to be smarter than brute force. He failed first. He pulled red too hard and chopped a chunk of the bridge like a bad haircut. He heard workers scream. He swallowed the scream and coughed glass. Hinata's hand grabbed his sleeve through the tiny door. He opened her and jerked. He stopped. He listened. He changed. He watched the mirrors instead of the girl in them. He listened to the sound of needles before they left Haku's fingers, to the footwork that wrote itself across ice. He put small, neat windows in his field and let Tenten's wrapped chain pass through precisely there. It whistled. It hooked. It yanked. Haku stumbled 1 step and then unstumbled with the dignity of someone good at falling. Sorry, Naruto said. Ridiculous. He meant it. Haku's eyes hid behind the mask. He could see the softness anyway. She threw needles that didn't try to kill, and he noticed. In the haze of fight, Zabuza finally looked at his employer with the clear eyes of someone who has been hired by worse. The turn was quiet. It always is. He swung not at Naruto, not at Kakashi, but at the problem that had made Wave a bruise. Goto's men swarmed because that's what men who are paid by the hour do when they think the day might end early. Naruto walked into the center with the casualness of a boy who has decided that being bait is almost as fun as being a hammer. He pulled blue in curlicues. Knives ripped out of hands like apologies. Chains clanked free of wrists. Haku iced the ground into a slide that varied 3 men into the side of a cart where they sat down hard and reconsidered labor. Tenten's tools sang and did not bite deep. She had learned restraint from him and was insultingly good at it already. When it was over, Zabuza died in the right place for a man like him. On his feet, near the bridge he'd tried to break. Naruto stood at a slight angle and didn't cry out of respect. Haku stood facing him with hands slack at her sides. She had thrown enough needles at him to make a lesson, not a point. He had opened enough doors for her to know he wasn't a coward. You could have killed me, she said, voice muffled. You didn't try to kill me, he said. It felt rude to reciprocate. She tilted her head, and a laugh tumbled out of her like a bird startled into flight. She pressed gloved fingers to the lower edge of her mask and breathed. I am tired of being used, she said simply. He nodded. He understood tools that woke up and resented it. We're going to make the world do what we say, he said. With manners. Ambitious, she said, and the word was not insult. Hungry, murmured the fox, which was not insult, either. Haku removed her mask in one clean motion and tucked it into her belt. She looked like water when it's about to freeze then decides not to. I will help you, she said, and the vow had the weight of someone who did not spend vows lightly. Naruto didn't pretend. That didn't move something in him he'd been keeping in a jar with air holes. He bowed, not scripted, not formal, just because his body wanted to put his head lower to mark the moment. They named the bridge later. Because people crave punctuation. The man whose name it wore didn't matter as much as the fact that a place that had been poured into mold by fear would pour itself into a new one because a few people had refused to be shaped. Gojo appeared on the far parapet after the crowd went home. He unwrapped his blindfold and let his too bright gaze rest on Naruto, on Hinata brushing hair from her bruised forehead, on Tenten picking up one of her paper tags and frowning at a tear, on Haku sitting with feet dangling above the water like a village kid. You did it, Gojo said. No smirk, no joke, just pride said like an observation about the weather. We did it, Naruto said, deliberate. Gojo put the blindfold back on as if to dim the world back to something the rest could tolerate. Good answer. He didn't stay. Naruto preferred it that way. He had learned to like being the gravity in his own circle. They returned to Konoha to reports and paperwork and the kind of rumor that you see live inside like a coat if you're not careful. Root did not come to fetch him again. The sect sent whispers instead, polite invitations to submit to tests that would make him safer for everyone. Naru, to put the letters in a drawer and let them become a stack with a name. He did not answer because silence is an answer with teeth. Hiruzen watched him consciously not turn small. It pleased the old and scared him because things that rise attract eyes in the sky. Kakashi graded them in an eye crinkle and a stick of Pocky. Sakura punched his shoulder with gratitude disguised as annoyance. Sasuke looked at him with a face full of math. Tenten handed him a tool wrapped in cloth and said, "Don't abuse it without me." Hinata reached for his sleeve and did not need him to open a door because he had forgotten to close it. He was learning neglect can be kindness if you aim it right. At sunset, Naruto climbed the Hokage monument and sat where stone warmed his thighs. The village looked small enough to cup, which was a rude thought and also sweet. He flexed his hand. The air near it listened like a dog with one ear up. "I want a home," he said to no one and to the fox and to the roof tiles and to Gojo wherever he was. "Not a throne." Quote. The fox grumbled. "Thrones are easier to fight from." "Maybe," Naruto said, "but you can sleep in a home." He leaned back on his palms and let the last light wash the day clean. For a second the world lost its edges entirely, not in panic, but in satisfaction. He had pulled himself a little farther from the boy on the swing counting creeks. He had not pulled away from him. He had made space and then filled it with people who asked instead of took. Someone climbed the last few steps. Hinata. He didn't have to look. "Sit," he said. She sat, close enough that shoulders met and neither flinched. They watched Konoha go from gold to blue, a town taking off its face and putting on its bones. Naruto thought of doors. He thought of the way infinity felt most right, not as a wall, but as a net he could shape and then share. He decided something then that would get him into trouble later and make him impossible to erase. He would build a room inside the RLD where people could stand without being punished for it. "You're smiling," Hinata said softly. "Yeah," Naruto said. "I think I know what I want to make." She didn't ask what. She waited. He liked her for that, too. He didn't speak the name that had crept into his thoughts, Boundless Room, because names like to be earned. He just watched the lamps wink on, one by one, and let the distance between him and the future soften into a thing he could cross when he chose. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Mist on a Knife's Edge. Wave learned how to breathe again. Not all at once. Towns don't change because men stop swinging. But the air around the docks loosened and the fishermen talked with their hands again, not just their eyes. The bridge wore its new name badly at first, like a shirt one size too big that you grow into by living in it. Naruto didn't linger in the way people do when they want applause to become history. He helped load lumber until his shoulders ached and convinced rope to behave when knots should have slipped. He let the dog through his field on purpose and said nothing when the dog treated him like a door that learned manners. He slept hard. He woke with the old tightness in his chest less tight. On their last night, Tsunami set bowls on the table like a woman arming her home with soup. Inari ate without glaring the entire time. Progress could be measured in how long boys forgot to remember their anger. Kakashi made a quiet show of checking their luggage and then didn't check it at all, trusting them to have learned a week's worth of competence in 3 days. Sasuke spun a senbon between his fingers and glanced at Naruto the way you look at a riddle you don't like admitting is good. Sakura tied her hair back with a strip of cloth and tightened the knot twice, as if daring the world to loosen it. Haku finished scrubbing the last dish and dried her hands on a square of linen so carefully it could have been a ceremony. She stood by the door with her mask hanging from 2 fingers. She watched the room as if filing a map under tea-stained light. Tenten nudged Naruto's ribs with an elbow. "Pay attention," she murmured. "Her knives are different from mine." "I noticed," Naruto said, not looking. Because Haku had showed him how to watch without making a face out of it. "Good," Tenten said, satisfied. They walked out at dawn. The bridge took their footfalls without complaint. Mist draped under the span and unhooked itself slowly as the sun convinced it to. Haku paused at the midpoint, resting her palms on the rail, and watched water refuse to carry the dead. Naruto stood beside her, far enough that the air between them didn't need a door and close enough that neither called it distance. "You made a choice," he said, to the river. "I stopped letting choices be made for me," Haku said. She rotated the mask once and tucked it into her pack. "It's not the same thing, but it will do." "Are you sure about Konoha?" Sakura asked from behind them, bluntly. 'Cause kindness wastes time when you could just ask the thing you fear. No, Haku said simply. But I am sure about the people who asked me to come. That was good enough. They left wave with backs at didn't feel watched in the way that makes skin tight. The road cut through green that had the shine of leaves slicked with morning and then duller hummocks where farmers had exhausted the land and made bargains with weeds. By noon they were far enough that Konoha felt like a door you might be able to open in 2 more sleeps and not a myth. The ambush waited at the place roads like to be stupid about. Where a levee shouldered up against a rice paddy and a stand of bamboo made a nice curtain for bad ideas. Naruto heard it before he saw it, not with ears but with the way his field tucked its shoulders without asking. He raised his hand as if to scratch his cheek, and Hinata, already alert, tipped her chin once. Kakashi didn't turn around. He got lazier, which for him meant deadly. 3 shapes peeled out from green and brown. Not bandits. Too tidy. Not root. Their posture carried a ritual instead of a mandate. They wore half-masks shaped like shrine lions and prayer tags woven into their sleeves, ink crisp and fresh. The one in front raised both palms, none threatening, a liar's gesture that smelled like incense. "We seek the boy," the leader said. Their voice was woman soft and iron steady. "We will not harm his companions." "Bad opening," Tenten said. "Try again with less cult." Haku slid a half-step left to catch the angle no one else wanted to think about yet. Sasuke shifted his stance a hair toward offense. Sakura planted her feet at Tazuna distance that wasn't needed anymore and then reset to sensible. Kakashi finally deigned to lift his head. "Religious types," he said. "Always so generous with other people's options." Naruto met the leader's gaze. She wore no makeup, no rings, nothing to distract from the lines duty had etched on her mouth. "You're the null sect?" he asked. "Names are for allies," the leader said. Half a beat. "Yes. Then no," Naruto said, and didn't move, because doors sometimes get more respect by not swinging first. Prayer slips hissed off their sleeves like thrown leaves. They didn't fly straight. They curved with the arrogance of good math, their circles reaching for him like hands with rules. Naruto's field tightened out of reflex, a wall that said no and meant it. The first slip hit air and quivered. Naruto heard the paper whisper as ink tried to reach into the definition of distance and cancel a few terms. He had a single ugly heartbeat of sensation like stepping into a room where someone had just said his name for the wrong reason. "Don't let them touch your skin," Gojo had said, months ago over skewers, as if talking about soy. "Seals don't care if you're special. They care if they can finish a sentence." The second slip came in curling low. Haku's knife sang, not to hit the paper but to slap the air beneath it. The slip rose in surprise and struck Naruto's field an inch higher than it wanted. It stuck and smoked and died like a rude firefly. The leader's eyes flicked to Haku. Noted. Adjusted. A third kind of sill. Ence that comes from being noticed too late. Flickered to Naruto's right and reached with a charm that folded in on itself like origami, a cube of ink that made his teeth ache. Hinata's foot whispered across dirt. "There," she breathed, and tapped the ground with her toe. Naruto opened a door at the exact point she marked. Not big, a keyhole. The cube slid through the gap in his field and embedded TSELF in a clump of grass where it unfolded and ate a clean die-cut hole out of the world the size of a fist. The grass edges smoked. The hole hung like a mouth, wrong, then shivered shut with a pop. "Polite," the leader said. "Approval, no." Cataloging. Kakashi didn't take his hands out of his pockets. "Take the hint," he said. "Go home and rewrite your charter." The leader flowed into a stance that had as much kata as prayer in it. She lifted a palm with 2 slips prepped between her fingers like narrow, hungry wings. "Uzumaki Naruto," she said, "you will accept the silence seal for the public good." "That's a terrible name," Naruto said. "Who came up with that?" "Do you hold meetings?" "We convene," she said, and flicked her fingers. Tenten's coil word. "Door," she snapped. Naruto opened one at her eye line. Just the diameter of a coin. Tenten's weighted needle hissed through, kissing the world only where he let it. It threaded the 2 slips mid-air, pierced them cleanly, and smashed into a bamboo trunk where it stuck and hung. The ink on both slips wriggled like offended eels and then died. "Cute," the quiet third operative said for the first time, voice like the edge on rice paper. Accurate, Tenten said, pleased. The leader's expression didn't change. She snapped a wrist and flung a string of 6 slips at once. They bloomed into netting, all math and malice. Naruto felt his field thicken as the net's circles tried to quantize space into polite little boxes where infinity would become something you could write on a ledger. He caught the idea of what they wanted, not a wall, a grid. His spectrum of choices came pre-cut. He did not try to make the net go away. He changed the game. He stepped into the box they'd built and decided where the lines went. Open here, Hinata said, from his left, not frantic. Precise. Naruto popped 3 doors, thin as whiskers, exactly where she saw microcurrents. He gave the grid permission to breathe in those slits. The net bulged, caught on its own rules, and then tore along the allowances he'd offered. Holes. Haku dove through the largest and drove 2 needles into the ground between the leader's feet with the speed of someone done with being read like a diagram. Frost climbed the needles and spread in a delicate lattice, drawing a pretty pattern that had one function: make footing a little too honest. The leader took a half step, found the cold where she didn't want it, and rebalanced. Her right hand dipped to a pouch. Kakashi's hand flicked lazily and her pouch came away in his grip without any offense taken by physics. He looked into it, eyes smiling with professional interest. Your budget is better than ours. The third operative threw the cube again. This time, power curled around it like thread burning, faster, hungrier. Naruto recognized escalation. He breathed once, took the need to win out of his mouth and set it on the ground like a toy he'd pick up later, and rolled his shoulders. Let me, he said to no one. He didn't power up, he got simpler. He pulled blue softly, a sliver, just enough to offer the cube a wrong low place to roll. It drifted, surprised by gravity's bad manners, and kissed Kakashi's sandal. Kakashi lifted his foot without looking. The cube fell into the muddy edge of the patty and ate a neat corner out of water and earth with an offended gulp. The hole convulsed and sealed with a burp that smelled like old ink. The leader exhaled, not with fear, with the thoughtful frustration of someone who had expected a useful failure and gotten a new problem. She lifted her chin. Sorry, the quiet operative said. Warning. So, the leader had a name. Names make people stick. Naruto filed that away because he had learned names can do more damage than weapons. Sorry, he said, testing the weight. You try to fix broken gods by breaking children. Her gaze flicked to his whisker marks. We try to keep villages from becoming collateral to men who think they are gods, she said evenly. You are bright. That's not a compliment. Tenten tilted her head at Naruto like a friend playing wingman. You gonna quit while you're behind? She said to Sori. Or do we have to get creative? Hinata's bare hand hovered near Naruto's sleeve. He opened a door without looking. She settled her fingertips there to mark rhythm as if they were musicians and not a target in his spotter. He breathed in time with her, in, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, and the spike in his field flattened from a hedge into grass. Sori's eyes chilled. Her mask hid nothing. It was only a habit. We will return, she said. Bring fewer slips, Naruto said. And a better pitch. She signaled with 2 fingers and her team faded back into bamboo without panic noise. Professionals. The hole in the patty gurgled shut. The road remembered how to be trivial. Kakashi put the confiscated pouch in his vest pocket, because it's important to steal from cults. New friends, he said. Enemies who can read, Tenten corrected. Plucking her needle out of bamboo, she set the paper circle she'd skewered onto her palm, considering. They're learning you, Naruto. Then we'll make their lesson expensive, Haku said softly, wiping the mud from the knife she'd used to slap air. And not with blood, if we can help it. Sakura blew out a breath in a way she probably thought didn't sound like relief. I hate how polite they are, she said. They haven't met me on a bad day, Naruto said, but it was a joke you tell to remind yourself you have edges. Inside, he catalogued every sensation the net had pushed against him, the way it had wanted him sliced into manageable parts, and made a promise at a caterpillar's pace, he would invent a room their rules couldn't enter. He didn't know how yet. He knew he wanted it. Sori's team did not return that day. They'd been probing, not hunting. The rest of the walk tasted like bamboo water and the exhausted sweetness of not dying. They camped in a patch of scrub that would annoy any ambushers with burrs. Kakashi took first watch without comment. Sakura put a kettle on the little stove they used when fires would draw curiosity and kept one eye on the horizon. Sasuke sat on a boulder pretending not to listen to the others' breathing patterns and listening anyway. Haku cut apples into neat eighths and ate them like a ritual, one slice for each corner of the heart. Hinata and Naruto stepped a little ways off. Pine resin and earth smell wrapped their ankles. He opened a door the size of a coin over his elbow without thinking, and she touched it with 2 fingers as if checking a pulse. She hummed, something that might have been a tune and might have been counting. "You did well," she said. "I almost didn't," he said. "Honesty is cheaper up front." Their grid, she tipped her face toward the dark. "Your field wants to be a surface. They want it to be a volume. If they stack enough volumes, you drown." "Good image," he said. "Hate it," she smiled, small, sobered with a thought that made a crease between her brows. "You could build a room," she said, surprised by her own echo of his unnamed plan. "Not a wall, a room with edges you decide, where people can stand." He looked at her, and the relief of not having to explain it first made his knees almost buckle. "Yes," he said, "but rooms have doors, Hinata." "I know," she said, with the certainty of someone who has spent her whole life opening and closing quietly. "You'll need to decide who to invite." "What if I invite the wrong person?" He didn't mean her. He didn't have to say her name. She heard the shape of it anyway. "Then you ask them to leave," she said. "And you have friends who will help you hold the door." He laughed, soft, because he could see Tenten's face in that sentence, the indignation at anyone who made a mess. Haku's delicate disapproval, Sakura's efficient anger, even Sasuke's quiet calculation, which you could call loyalty if you were kind, and he deserved kindness even when he refused it. Later, after dishes were cleaned and the sky had thrown down all its stars and started pulling a few back, Gojo arrived without arriving. He didn't drop out of trees. He didn't flicker. He was suddenly where the light from the stove ended and the dark began, because some men are most themselves in thresholds. "How's the field trip?" he asked, and sat cross-legged like a schoolboy who hadn't learned to be boring. "Religious types tried to make me small," Naruto said. "We said no." "Good," Gojo said. He leaned back on his hands, and his blindfold slid up a finger's width. Oh, the stars could see what color his eyes were. He sounded casual when he added, "They'll escalate." "Always the helpful coach," Kakashi said from his watchpoint, not looking over. "I bring snacks," Gojo said. He produced a paper bag from a place that had no right to hold one. He set it in the middle of camp. "Dango. An apology. A bribe." Sakura eyed the bag, then Gojo, then the geometry of trust in the little circle, and took one skewer. "Thanks," she said, "which means I see you trying to be human among my people." He accepted it like a good joke landed well. "You're blue," Gojo told Naruto around. The time Sasuke peeled away with a yawn that was a weapon, is getting clean. "But you took too much out of the bridge with that red." "No," Naruto said, quietly. The admission was a stone in his street. Omic he had decided to carry instead of pretending wasn't there. "Make it a line," Gojo said. "Not a punch. Like snapping a towel. Don't think force. Think instruction." Naruto nodded. He tucked it away with all the other small phrases that would turn into body later when his mouth forgot them. "Also," Gojo added, "your doors, good taste. It's rude to make your allies wait when they're trying to touch you. Keep practicing." "Stop making it weird," Naruto said. His ears were hot. Tenten cackled from her bedroll because she could smell teenage discomfort like smoke. Haku finished her last apple slice and set the peel aside in a coil. "Null sect leader," she said, eyes on the peel, voice not careless. "Sorry." "Yes," Naruto said. "Don't make an enemy out of her alone," Haku said. "Make an enemy out of what she thinks she needs to be. Leave the person room." He looked at her and, as always, she was already looking at the thought itself and not at what he might do with it. "You talk like we have time," he said. "We make time," she said. "We decide which rush is worth it." Gojo sighed, theatrical, and flicked a pebble at Naruto's knee. It slowed an inch away and dropped with a tick. He Made a pleased noise like a teacher watching a child stop drawing circles of fire around their homework. I like your friends, he said. They make you better. They made me spend money on dumplings, Naruto said. I don't know him, Tenten said toward the stars. You owe me a hug window, Naruto shot back. This, unfortunately, was true. Tenten rolled onto her stomach and drummed her heels on her bedroll like a kid. Tomorrow, she said, I need to build you a thing that can ride your doors without ripping you open. Agreed, Gojo said blithely. No ripping. Kakashi stirred, which is how he says go to sleep without humiliating anyone. They did, in the way trained bodies do, folding themselves into rest like knives into sleeves. They hit Konoha by mid-morning 2 days later, legs hot, faces dirty, humor sharper for it. The village gates threw them the usual lazy salute and then more eyes, whispers, the wind of rumor changing direction. A few kids from the academy pointed and then pretended they hadn't. Naruto pretended not to preen and failed a little. He allowed it. You're allowed to own something you bled to keep. Hiruzen summoned them before they could leak stories into the street. The Hokage's office smelled like tea and a pipe he wasn't smoking. Sun through the window left dust like a map. He listened without interrupting. He did not give speeches. He thanked Haku like someone who has lost a particular kind of child before and is grateful for a stranger deciding not to be lost. He took Gojo's bag of dango with a sigh that meant why do I indulge you and an eye crinkle that meant because I like sugar. Old or not, null sect, Hiruzen said, when the room settled. Danzo has petitioned to meet them on neutral ground to discuss containment partnerships. Kakashi's visible eye did a small, precise frown. Sakura made a noise under her breath that was as close to profanity as she allowed in official rooms. Sasuke stared at the window and counted cards that hadn't been dealt yet. Tenten took a paper off Hiruzen's desk and read it upside down because she'd read on a ceiling if you let her. Haku stood, hands folded, perfect guest, and noted every corner. Hinata looked at Naruto. Not a question, a confirmation that he would not make her drag words out of him. Tell him no, Naruto said to the Hokage, an impulse, a plea, a dare. Or tell him he can meet them in a room where I can hear them. Hiruzen exhaled through his nose. I will tell him he can meet them, he said, honest. But not without witnesses. He set a paper on the desk. It had neat characters and too many exclamation marks near the bottom. Also, he added, Chunin exams. 2 weeks. Tenten whooped. Sakura stood straighter like someone had pulled a string in her spine. Sasuke's mouth twitched into a smile that would scare a less brave boy. Hinata didn't smile. She glowed a fraction, which for her was a shout. Haku's eyes warmed with a private amusement. Naruto's stomach went simultaneously light and heavy. Good. He wanted to feel like that about something earned, not given. They filed out with instructions in their pockets and decisions in their shoulders. Naruto lingered in the hall without realizing he had, looking at the way the light fell across a wooden pillar as if that mattered more than it did. The pillar had a chalk mark on it. Not big. A neat sigil, 2 intersecting circles pierced by a vertical line. Quiet as a spider web in a corner. He reached up and rubbed it with his thumb. The chalk came away easy. A harmless thing. A message for him, not the Hokage. We see you. He wanted to grind his thumb against the pillar until wood burned. He didn't. He wiped the chalk on his pants and left the residue on cloth that would go through the wash and make someone swear about white powder on a dark load. Don't let them live in your head, Gojo said behind him, because Gojo had a hobby of fitting himself exactly into the spaces where Naruto's nerves flickered. I won't, Naruto said. He didn't know if it was a lie. He said it anyway. Words don't make a promise real, but they make you look for ways to keep it. Team 7 became 4 and then 5 for the rest of the day while they got the business of being home done. Sakura dragged Sasuke and Tenten through the market for supplies that would say, "We're serious," in the language of tape and fresh thread and decent shoes. Haku disappeared toward the hot springs with the air of someone who has decided not to be haunted by mirrors that aren't hers anymore. Hinata went back to her compound and came back exactly 8 minutes later with a bag and a long, patient look that said nothing worth saying out loud and yet said everything Naruto needed. They met again at Training Ground 3 once the heat lost its grip. Tenten built something and wouldn't say what. She set it on the grass wrapped in oilcloth and smirked so hard it had to be good. Hinata limbered, ankles and wrists, like a quiet instrument. Hawk, you tied her hair up with a strip of blue cloth and then retied it because that was the sort of perfection she liked, the low-stakes kind that reminded you your hands were yours. All right, Tenten said, kneeling by her bundle. 2 problems with your field. You hate corners, which will be hilarious in a written exam, and you bruise people when you forget to open a door. So, I made you a toy. She whipped the oilcloth back. Underneath sat what looked like a narrow spear half a meter long, its shaft braided from wire and seal paper, a flattish head like a needle's eye. It hummed at the edge of hearing. Phase needle, she announced. It only exists where Naruto allows it. Everywhere else it's a rumor. If he closes the door on it, it pauses instead of tearing him a new sleeve. You made your weapon dependent on me, Naruto said. Half horrified, half in love with the audacity. Welcome to trusting people, Tenten said, cheerful. Door. He opened one the size of a coin at chest height. Nten lifted the phase needle and tapped the air. It slid into the door and vanished. Naruto felt it in his field like the gentlest itch. Tenten rolled her wrist. The needle ghosted out of the exit he opened by his shoulder, shimmered. And paused a hair before touching his teeth. He grinned. He opened a door near Hinata's palm. The needle reappeared close enough for her to feel the hum. She didn't flinch. She smiled. Small. That shout of hers. Haku stepped forward with a paper packet and a thin brush. Ink, she said. Not with binding. With temperature. She painted tiny sigils along the needle's shaft between Tenten's paper tags. Stitches of frost that whispered. When you pass through him, don't burn, she told the tool, which was ridiculous and worked anyway. Intention has hands if you let it. 3 hours slid past like 10 minutes. Hinata called angles. Tenten cursed with affection when Naruto let a door lag and the needle kissed his sleeve. It paused like a well-trained hound instead of ripping fabric. Haku sent thin plates of ice skimming along the grass at ankle height, not to trip, to make them move truer. Kakashi watched from a stump and occasionally raised 2 fingers for. Again, without saying it because saying it makes people tired. Naruto tried red again when the light went low. He had avoided it since the bridge because bridges remember. He pictured a towel snap, not a punch. He told the world not move but make space in one clean instruction. He aimed the line not at a person and not at Tenten's tool and not at Haku's plates but at an empty strip of air ending in a rotting log. He breathed. He snapped. The air hiccuped and the log popped in half with a sound like a book closing. Leaves lifted and floated down, all very pretty and not at all lethal. Tenten whooped. Hinata clapped once. Haku nodded, closed-lipped and pleased. Better, Kakashi said, which meant very good. Naruto exhaled and only then realized he'd been holding his breath so long his fingers tingled. He shook them out. Emotion tries to spend you without asking. He paid attention to the bill. Again, he said. No one argued. They did it again until mosquitoes became brave and the smart ones decided to call it a night. They sprawled after, tired and fed by the kind of work that points you at a shape you want to be. Tenten lay with her arms flung above her head and groaned like a temple bell hit by an unskilled monk. Hug window, she announced, because she didn't forget promises even when they were jokes. Naruto opened a clean round permission near his shoulder. Tenten scooted in. Bonked her forehead on his bicep on purpose like a cat. There, she said, satisfied. You're human. Temporarily, he said. Don't let it go to your head, she said. Hinata sat near his feet, legs folded neatly. She rested the back of her hand against his ankle where the door he'd left open folded around her almost by itself. The contact was nothing to look at. He felt it anyway, more than he should. He tried not to flinch away from the good. Haku leaned back on her palms and looked at the sliver of moon with the face of someone who had decided to be awake for it. We will have to face them again, she said. She did not have to say which them. I know, Naruto said. He turned his palm up and felt the edges of a room that didn't exist yet. He imagined it gentle and firm and full of doors. He didn't want to make a domain that crushed. He wanted a place where people could stop running. Sasuke stood, brushed grass from his pants with short, irritable slaps like he resented how many blades had stuck to him, and said. To the air. 2 weeks. Kakashi said, which meant he agreed, and also you can leave now without permission. They did leave, in twos and threes, because that's how families not ready to admit their families solve the problem of lingering. Naruto walked the long way home, the route that passes a bakery that always burns the bottom of its loaves a little because the baker likes that taste and refuses to change. On his door someone had chalked another simple sigil, almost the same as the one on the Hokage's pillar but with a small, cruel flourish at the top. He didn't erase it. He opened his hand in front of it. The chalk hung a hair's width from his palm, shivering inside his field. He stared at it until the sting of anger dulled into a decision. He stepped closer, door open, and pressed his hand to the wood right through their little threat. Chalk smeared on his skin. He left the handprint there, a pale smear on cheap paint. They could mark him. He could mark back. He washed his hands and ate cold rice with pickles and a raw egg because he couldn't be bothered to cook for one, and because sometimes good enough is how you tell your body you'll give it something better tomorrow. He lay on his back in bed and called the fox a few names under his breath. The fox grumbled back and didn't offer him power, which was new and maybe respect. Konoha quieted late. Stalls rattled closed. The wind did its inspection. Somewhere, a gate hinge squealed and Kakashi rolled over and pretended it hadn't bothered him. Gojo probably stood on a roof and grinned at no one, content to be the ridiculous star on top of a tree. Naruto made his breath the floor and slept on it. Morning would put the exam notice in every mouth. Danzo would write a letter that asked Ed permission to do something he'd already started. The null sect would mark a neutral courtyard with salt and fine lines and ask Hiruzen to step into them. Sori would look at her hands and wonder if they had always been this clean. And she would not enjoy the answer. Naruto would build a smaller door today than yesterday, and then another. He would practice red like snapping a towel and blue lick, taking a thorn out without breaking the skin. He would open his first, awkward, imperfect room under the shade of the training ground tree and invite exactly 3 people inside. He would learn what it felt like to hold space without strangling it. He would fail at something stupid and laugh too loud. He would learn what to be afraid of on purpose. For now, he slept, and Konoha breathed like a large animal, dangerous and beloved. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Exams, Snakes, and the Sect. Konoha loved a festival that pretended it wasn't one. The week before the Chunin exams, the village smelled like ink and sweat and nerves. Stalls sold skewers with names like Luck on a Stick. Kids sprinted between legs with forehead protectors tied too tight because hope is a tourniquet. Banners hung with characters so neat they could be eaten. The academy cleaned its chalkboards like it was trying to forget how many times they'd been shouted at. Naruto did not buy a headband charm. He bought cheap dumply NGS and burned his tongue and told himself it was tranning. They ate lunch on the academy steps where shadows made a good compromise between visibility and ease. Sakura read a book with the intensity of someone trying not to count bodies. Sasuke pretended to nap and listened to the building breathe. Tenten sharpened the phase needle with a strip of leather and the kind of affection you give a dog that bites on command. Hinata sketched water lines in the dirt with a twig and mapped breezes. Haku braided her hair in 3 strands and fixed it with a bit of blue thread that refused to be dramatic. A boy in a green jumpsuit saluted them with a sincerity that made Naruto grin. Youth, he declared, because Gai-sensei was a disease that made you louder. Youth, Naruto returned, solemn, because Akari wastes momentum if you do it wrong. Kakashi appeared when the bell rang, because the man had a relationship with bells. He handed Naruto a clean pencil and a look that said use it for the thing it's for. And disappeared as if the doorway had decided to be empty longer than usual. The written exam tried to be a trap and failed at being a surprise. Naruto clenched his jaw for the first 5 meters. Anutes while other people's pencils made confident cricket noises. A proctor with hair like a broom watched his desk a little too long, and he stared back until he remembered you shouldn't start fight with invigilators unless you had a punchline. He could have cheated by listening to breath rhythms and inferring answers from the way hands paused just a beat in awe over correct solutions. He could have used blue like a magnet to tug a paper corner his way for 1 second and then regret it later in a story he'd have to keep up forever. He did neither. He wrote the answers he knew, and for the questions he didn't. He wrote sentences that sounded like they might be true if the world were kinder. Sakura's hand paused on the last page. She breathed once like she was resetting a bone and then LLED the column in with a hand that did not slip. Sasuke's mouth tightened in the middle of the paper, not at the question, at his own answer being too much like a man he didn't want to be. He left items blank and looked furious at them, which is its own kind of integrity. Naruto set his pencil down when the proctor called time and realized his palms had sweat a little. It made the paper curl like a leaf just starting to dry. He pressed it flat with both hands and decided not to make a joke when the proctor collected it. Humor that hides fear has a smell. He didn't like it on himself. Ko hit the room like a thrown knife that stopped a foot before your heart and left you grateful and annoyed. Forest of Death, she said with delight. Sign the waivers. Try not to die, we've got enough paperwork. Tenten whistled low. Finally, she murmured. A teacher with good branding. They signed. Naruto looked at the clause about injury and shrugged like he wasn't 12. He wasn't, not in the ways that counted. He met Anko's eyes when she passed his desk. She grinned and licked a kunai because she liked the reaction and he declined to provide one. She liked him for refusing to be a prop. Outside, the wind had a mean edge. The kind that makes leaves tell secrets. The Forest of Death's gate sat open-mouthed. Anko gave a speech that promised nothing but immediate consequences. Naruto rolled his shoulders, opened a narrow door for Hinata's fingers to touch his sleeve without delay, and looked at Haku the way you look at a river you're going to cross, not to see yourself. Maps? Sakura asked, crisp, checking everyone's packs with the eye of a quartermaster. Counters. Water. Phase needle, Tenten said, patting the tool as if it could purr. Sasuke adjusted his pouch and didn't say what he wanted to say. Which was, don't look at me to do something spectacular, I'm saving it. Naruto didn't ask him to spend anything today he wasn't willing to part with. He had learned to be careful with other people's heroics. They slipped into the trees. The forest greeted them indifferently. The path disappeared on purpose. Mosquitoes filed forms with the Department of Bother and got approved in 30 seconds. Naruto felt his field contract, not from fear, but from the press of life that didn't care whether he was interesting. They made progress in a series of small wins, Hinata's Byakugan marking pressure pockets where roots made bad ankles, Tenten's needle threading between branches through doors Naruto pin-pricked into being to set slender trip lines no one would notice until they were nursing a bruise. Sasuke kicking a snake in a way that was disrespectful to snakes and necessary for their continued forward motion. Sakura calling halt before a patch of mushrooms that wanted to be admired and then eaten and then used to ruin your day. Naruto caught a whiff of killing intent as precise as a surgeon's breath. It slid along his spine like a finger dipped in ice water. He didn't stiffen. He had promised himself he would not feed monsters reactions they could use for dessert. Left, Hinata breathed, so quietly even the trees might not overhear. A man stood between Woe trunks the way a blade stands on a whetstone. His hair fell like a tongue of black flame. His face was the kind that makes people draw it in wrong angles and swear later when they realize they forgot to account for hunger. Orochimaru, Kakashi had said once, around a fire and not looking at anyone. Naruto recognized him without the benefit of introduction. He stared at them as if they were Pag's in a book he had marked with little flags for future reference. Children, he said, tasting the word like something foreign and delicious. Snake, Naruto said, because it was rude not to call Peo by what they were working so hard to be. Orochimaru's laugh sounded like silk fraying. He lifted one hand and a dozen snakes uncoiled from his sleeve like an ugly idea. They slithered into the space between Naruto and air. Naruto felt his field prick up in anger. He didn't blast them. He made a line with red that told the world move here and nowhere else. It snapped like a towel. The front rank of snakes recoiled, not broken. Decided. Haku moved, all ankle and quiet. Her senbon caged Orochimaru's wrist in a triangle that would have stuck a lesser man to a tree for long enough to talk about it. He rotated his bones wrong and admired her. Tenten's needle zipped through two doors Naruto opened without thinking. It passed so close to Orochimaru's cheek that it made his hair tremble. He healed the mark before they could be satisfied they'd left one. Sasuke, Orochimaru crooned, a sin offered on a plate. Sasuke's chin lifted and Naruto saw the boy's stubborn soul look back out of his eyes at something that wanted to take up residence there and learned it would be expensive. Sasuke did not answer. That was harder than any jutsu he knew. Orochimaru grew bored with foreplay and snapped his wrist. A tide of snakes surged. Mouths open with seals for tongues. They didn't strike Naruto. They struck the ground at his feet and built a living lattice out of their bodies, boxes, not a wall. Naruto saw the math of it at the same time. Hinata hissed a warning and Tenten swore a new, inventive word. It was like the sect's net, but alive. The boxes started to shrink. Naruto did the first stupid thing he could have done. He flared his field in one go. It stung his friends. Haku flinched back. Tenten's teeth bared with the pain of a bruise that would be yellow tomorrow. Hinata's breath went shallow in the way people do when their ribs remember they're mortal. He stopped. He apologized with a glance without taking his eyes off the snakes. He breathed. Permission, he told the boxes, the snakes, the world. Here, and nowhere else. He opened 3 doors exactly where Hinata pointed. The boxes tried to collapse and found a corridor they hadn't accounted for. He stepped into it. Snakes thudded their heads on the places he had decided to be rude. He did not kill them. He kicked them like unfortunate ropes and moved. Orochimaru's mouth widened into something that remembered being human once and got over it. Fascinating, he said, which is what predators say before a vivisection. He moved too fast to watch with eyes. Naruto felt him instead. A pressure change, a drop in temperature. The world taking a deep breath because a storm had walked into the room. Naruto's body did what it had trained in wells to do. It chose not to be crushed. He bent the distance between Orochimaru's reaching fingers and his neck and made it longer by half a heartbeat. The hand passed through air that refused to be where it was supposed to. A mark brushed his cheek, hot, spiteful, and found infinity and stuck there, smoking. Naruto felt the ink of it like someone else's tongue on his skin and wanted to peel his face off. He didn't. He watched the seal writhe and slow and stop 2 whisker widths from being part of him. Orochimaru's eyes sparked with delighted hunger. Oh, he said softly. You are terrible news. Sasuke stepped between them, not with a battle cry, not dramatically, as if he were stepping into a conversation he had the right to interrupt. He flicked a kunai and the line of it cut the string between Orochimaru's attention and Naruto's neck long enough for Kaka. She, who did not exist until he needed to appear with a hand at Orochimaru's throat. Orochimaru flowed sideways with a laugh that made birds forget how to sing for 3 seconds. Later, he promised, which is what liars tell themselves to keep the blade interesting. He left in a body blur and a smear of snakes. The silence he left behind felt used. Sakura checked Naruto's cheek with brisk finge. That asked permission and he opened a door for her hand because he liked her insistence on surviving him. The seal stain had stopped an eyelash from his skin. She exhaled through pursed lips. Don't do that again, she said. Which meant please don't make me hold your life with my small hands. He made a face. I'll schedule my snake assaults. Tenten laughed too loud and then stopped and looked. Angry at herself and then didn't apologize because they didn't apologize for being human, not here. Hinata's hand hovered near his sleeve until he lifted his elbow and let her touch him. The contact grounded him. The trembling inside his field smoothed, ashamed of its fuss. They moved. The forest seemed to enjoy watching them. They needed a scroll. They acquired one without killing anyone, which is harder than people who write stories like to admit. Before they could gloat, the sect stepped into the space Orochimaru had warmed up. It did not look like an ambush. It looked like a corridor in an old temple that had wandered out between trees by accident. Chalk lines and thin paper charms hung between trunks. Naruto recognized Sori before she spoke. The way she held her shoulders wasn't military. It was devotional. Uzumaki Naruto, she said. She had left the lion mask at home. Her face was ordinary in the awful way of people you could forget if they didn't carry a cause. Allow us to ensure your power does not harm the public. You keep using that word, Tenten muttered. I do not think it means what you think it means. Sasuke shifted his weight minutely toward forward. Sakura's FEET planted at an angle that gave her options. Haku's gaze counted charms. Hinata's eyes flicked to chalk lines, tracing the math that wanted to become law. Naruto lifted one hand in greeting and then let it fall, empty. I have a better idea, he said. Don't. Sori exhaled, not impatient, tired. I don't expect you to understand our work, she said, like a woman explaining weather to a child. But I expect you to cooperate. Pass, Naruto said, and decided he didn't have to make her feel bad to win. She moved her fingers in a simple pattern and the chalk lines lit like a map of someone else's arteries. Naruto's field got the chills. The charms hummed. The space in front of him sliced itself into sections so neat you could wrap presents in them. His stomach turned. The grid wanted to cut him into compliant squares. Hinata touched his sleeve, firm. 3 fingers, she breathed. Left. Breathing like before. He inhaled. He exhaled. He opened a door the size of a dime, exactly where her finger had pointed. The grid stuttered. He opened a second, an inch above it. The chalk lines shivered and tried to reassert reality. He opened a third, letting the charm on the nearest trunk feel it and get confused. The geometry didn't like a puzzle it hadn't written. The section in front of them went soft. Tenten's phase needle slid through the soft spot and pinned a central charm with a good, honest thunk. The hum dropped a tone. Sakura stepped forward like she was making tea and tore 2 slips from the cross line with neat, angry fingers. Haku breathed frost across the chalk on the TR. Until the salt in it clumped and the line refused to take instructions. Sasuke kicked a marker off a stump and looked satisfied. The grid still held, wobbling like a bad memory. Sori's face did not change. She stepped into the pattern and placed a paper with both hands, careful, reverent. Gojo appeared 3 meters behind her, clapped once, and the clap sounded like disrespect to systems. Field trip, he chirped. Who brought snacks? Sori didn't start. She had trained herself not to. She placed the paper on the line and pressed her palm to it. Ink crawled outward like a spider laying thread. It reached the place where Hinata's door breathed and tried to cross. It couldn't find the bridge. Bad form to tattoo children, Gojo said pleasantly. He flicked 2 fingers and the nearest ch. Arm peeled off the trunk and flopped in the dirt like a fish without water. Especially without parental consent. You are not his parent, Sori said, still not rattled. Tell that to my crippling snack budget, Gojo said. He was not trying to save the day. He was trying to ruin her tempo. She stepped back from the charm and pressed her lips together until they whitened. She looked at Naruto, in that look was the patience of someone who can wait through a century of bad kings to topple the right one. This is not about you, she said softly. You are a symptom. Great, Naruto said. Vey me soup and a nap and fix the disease somewhere else. It's about all of you, she said, and tilted her head at his friends. You stand too close to a boy who will pull the roof down to make the wind behave. Or hold it up, Haku said into the space without asking for permission. He could hold it up. Sori's eyes flicked. Hinata saw surprise happen there and die well. Sori's throat moved she swallowed something she did not like. She lifted her hand, 2 fingers extended. A second team slid through trees to flank them. Their charms smelled new. Kakashi landed in the middle of the P. A turn on one knee without touching anything that would be offended. He looked at Sori with the polite curiosity of a man inquiring about the weather from someone who believes barometers are witchcraft. Is this the part where we exchange opinions, he asked, or the part where I confiscate your stationery and tell your headmaster you were bullying in the hallway? Sori's mouth almost smiled. It didn't. We'll return, she said. Not bluffing. Bring tea, Naruto said. We'll use cups. She gave him one searching look that unpacked nothing, too early, and left with her people, no rustle, no backward glance. The chalk lines dimmed until they were only dust again. The corridor became trees who didn't want to admit they had hosted a failed miracle. Gojo tugged a charm out of the dirt with 2 fingers and sniffed it. He said. Smells like committee. Get out, Kakashi said, not unkind. Fine, Gojo said, rolling the charm into a tube and sticking it behind his ear like a bartender with a pen. He stood, smiling in a way that made Naruto want to shove him into a pond, and turned to go. He paused, tilted his head, and said to Sori's absence, there are better ways to love people than to make them safe. Then he was gone because that was his hobby. They got their scroll and the exit and a few hours of sleep that left them more furious than rested, which is how it goes when you i.e. down in a test and the ground is grading you. The preliminaries came faster than the rumors. The arena had the ancient practical smell of old blood cleaned well and too often. Fights spun out with the rhythm of small stories. Sakura won hers on footwork and refusal. Sasuke made a boy with too many teeth regret having them. Tenten used the phase needle once to cut a tripwire rather than a person. And got booed by 3 loud idiots who liked gore. She bowed to them and blew a kiss and did not provide the gore. Haku took a hit on purpose to learn a rhythm and then returned it with interest and a bow deep enough to be polite and shallow enough to be a warning. Hinata walked into the ring with her shoulders still for once, as if her body were a polite refusal to be pushed. Neji looked at her, without contempt and with something worse, the certainty of an accountant. Naruto stood at the rail and left a door open at his sleeve for Hinata because rituals matter. His stomach tried to join the fight without him. He told it to sit. Fate, Neji said, because he was young enough to believe in it like a map rather than a metaphor. Practice, Hinata said, and set her feet. They met in the Spock. Where soft things turn out to be decisive. Neji's palms wrote lines in the air that Hinata had always stepped out of before. Today, she stepped into them and changed their endings. Naruto watched micro cushions in his field ripple where her palms skimmed his edges, borrowing his language without letting him be the topic. Neji stung. He was too good to be a straw man. He turned her around with clean, cruel taps. She smiled once without meaning to when one of her small reversals landed and surprised him. He grunted. She started breathing loud. He aimed to end it the way men ending things like too tidy. But Hinata refused tidiness. She stepped inside the last beat of his kata and pressed her palm, just once, just honest, against the sternum he protected with philosophy. Gentle fist. His breath stuttered. She lost. Barely. On points. She walked off the floor with a hand on her ribcage and a mouth stubbornly not crying and looked more alive than Naruto had ever seen her. You were beautiful, he told her, not flirting. Naming. She rolled her eyes like she would never get used to compliments delivered without a second agenda and leaned her shoulder against his for a second on purpose. It felt like a bell rung with 2 fingers. Between fights, Naruto practiced a thing in the stairwell, eyes closed, breath like a long flat board. He set the world around him in a box he had made. Not a domain. Not yet. A room the size of a storage closet. Sound soft. Light behaved itself. His friend stepped inside and sighed without knowing why. He counted 8 heartbeats and let it go. The room vanished. The trace of it stayed like a taste. Again, Haku said quietly. He did it again. She touched the air at the edge with a finger that smoked and did not frost. Warmer, she said, pleased. Show off, Tenten told him. And set a paper airplane in the door so it would pause, stunned, and then continue like nothing had happened. Okay. Yes, that's cool. The next crisis came not from exams, but from the arena's belly. Panic has a sound that bodies learn before words. Naruto turned before the first scream had finished being born. Sand hissed the way dry things do when they've decided to move. Gaara's gourd had split. The boy's eyes had gone the color of something you don't lick. The sand answered him the way dogs answer a whistle you can't hear. People did the thing civilians do and the world breaks politely in front of them. Stayed to see if someone else would fix it. Naruto walked into the underbelly where the smell of dust turned into a taste. He lifted his hand and did not try to stop the sand with a wall. He put a ring around Gaara 2 meters wide where blue stacked gently, coaxing grains to choose stillness. He gave the sand a place to be that wasn't everywhere. It made a purring sound like relief. Gaara glared at him from inside the ring as if Naruto had stolen his voice. He could have laughed and made it worse. He didn't. I get it, Naruto said, not moving closer. Being a storm is easier. Storms do not ask permission, Gaara said. His voice had the roughness of a boy trying to imitate a monster he had met too young. The sand quivered like a muscle flex. Mine does, Naruto said. He opened a door near his chest and then closed it, obvious, so Gaara could see the idea. Because I'll be dead without people. It's boring to be a god in an empty church. Gaara stared at him like he was sick. A twitch went through his face that might have been a laugh, once, before the desert got it. The sand shivered, energized by his doubt, ready to prove something ugly. It held at the ring. Fascinated by stillness as a new game. Hinata stood behind Naruto at an angle that made her useful and not a target. Tenten's hand hung near the phase needle without tension. Haku watched the sand's edge and blew a breath that cooled the grit where it wanted to climb and didn't. "I hate you," Gaara said, which is a thing lonely children say to bridges. "Not yet," Naruto said. "You're thinking about it." Gaara's lips pressed. The sand drooped. He let it go all at once, like a tantrum that had remembered it was being watched, and it fell to the floor with a sound like rain forgetting to rage. Gaara turned his face away as if he had given too much of it to strangers. "Get out," he said. The hate in it was for himself. Naruto did what the boy asked and left him a ring that took 10 minutes to fade. A gift of stillness to carry in his pocket until it ran out. The rest of the day rolled on as if nothing had almost happened. It always does. People clap when violence is in a designated space and tut when it spills. Naruto felt tired in the meat of his arms. Later, in a quieter corridor, Sori stood alone with her hands folded like she didn't know what to do with fingers unless they had ink. She had removed symbols from her robes. She looked smaller without her certainties, which made her more dangerous and more salvageable. "You saved civilians," she said to the floor near his shoulder. Acknowledging a fact like you place a stone. "They were there," he said. "What was I supposed to do? Grade the math and let it run?" "No," she said. She tilted her head and the lines on her mouth changed shape. "You were supposed to prove me right." He leaned against a pillar still warm from sun and considered how much to give her. "I'm building a room," he said finally. "Because hiding everything is as stupid as revealing everything. Inside the world. A place that can't be rewritten by your chalk or his snakes. It'll be small at first. Like a closet. But it'll hold." She did not gasp. She didn't clutch a charm. She studied him the way people study a bridge they're not sure will hold a cart. "Rooms have rules," she said carefully. "Who writes them?" "I do," he said. "And the people I invite. Dictators say that. Dictators don't open doors," he said. She flinched at that because she had closed so many for what she thought was mercy. "You will fail," she said, unadorned. "Walls crack. Rooms collapse. People take advantage." "I know," he said. "Help me fix it when it does." Her face did something he couldn't read because it wasn't for him. She looked at her hands like they might be asked to hold something other than rules. "If I come to you," she said, "it will not be because I am sorry. It will be because I cannot ignore the math." "Fine," he said. "Bring your math. I'll bring my doors." She left before either of them could make the moment something they would have to apologize for later. Naruto stood there long enough for the dust to notice him. Nd then forgot to leave the hall in a normal way and instead made a shortcut by sliding along a seam in the air. He popped out beside Tenten, who dropped her needle and yelped. "Doorbell," she hissed. "You can't just." "Sorry," he said, and grinned at the line of oil on her nose that she hadn't seen. He wiped it off with his thumb and didn't make it a thing. Night came with the little grit under the eyelids that means you're getting stronger or you're lying. Team 7 wedged their bodies onto the Hokage monument where there was always room to decide if you liked the present. Lights studded the village like so many small victories. Sasuke said nothing and meant I would have sliced the sand and suffered for it. Sakura said nothing and meant I keep counting how many we can save when things go sideways. Tenten lay on her back and flung a paper airplane and smiled when it drifted at the edge of Naruto's field without tearing. Hinata rested her shoulder against his again because that was a thing now. Haku balanced on the very edge with her toes over stone and did not dive because she had already decided not to. "Tomorrow," Naruto said, not heroic. "Tomorrow," they said, all of them, without needing a speech. He went home by rooftops because stairs are for days when you are exactly the size of your thoughts. He slept in a bed that knew the shape of his shoulders now. He dreamed of a room the size of a rice closet that held 3 people without being stingy. He woke with chalk under his fingernails and didn't know why. He brushed his hands off and saw white dust plume in his field and fall politely. He smiled at no one and started his day with rice and miso and the feeling, for a whole minute, of being something other than a symptom. Chapter 4. The Quiet War of Seals. The first explosion was polite. It coughed out of an alley like a candle losing patience and licked chalk lines onto brick that didn't exist a moment before. The blast tagged nobody, it simply left a sigil hovering like frost on glass. A circle parted by a thin vertical cut. Naruto felt his field pinch where the mark faced him, like a jaw clenching. He stepped sideways. The pinch tracked. Walk, Hinata said, low. He walked. Tenten walked with him, whistling off-key, hands in her pockets like she was thinking about snacks and not counting rooftops. Haku drifted ahead, a smudge of cool air. 2 turns later, an old woman dropped a basket of bitter gourds and scolded the ground. Naruto helped pick them up and set one back that tried to roll away out of habit. The chalk sigil on the far wall faded. He exhaled. The second explosion wasn't polite. It cracked the stones near the bathhouse, hissed seals along the steam, and turned a strip of street into a grid that jellied his knees. Naruto's field SP, IKED and Kata's numbers tried to write themselves underneath him. Hinata's fingers pinched his sleeve. He opened a door for her without looking. Tenten's phase needle thunked through one chalk node, and the grid relaxed with the sulky inhale of a trick that had been noticed too soon. By the time they reached the market square, 3 different alleys had coughed chalk. People went back to buying. Garlic like people do when they believe they've used up their share of emergencies for the week. Kakashi read a newspaper upside down and hummed without melody. Manufactured accidents, he said. So, me body wants you to treat the whole village like a test. Rude, Tenten said. And lazy. They're mapping me, Naruto said, staring at a peel of chalk someone's sandal had dragged into a long white comma. Haku crouched by the comma, breath fogging the stone. They're mapping responses, she corrected softly. Where you go when people scream. Where you won't go. Where your friends stand. Hinata's eyes glimmered pale with Byakugan. We changed the map. They did. Patrols became bait and switches. Tenten built decoy rigs. Paper balloons with stamped seals that looked expensive and were mostly stubborn. She had them drift into alleys at inopportune moments and chuckled when Root's shadows flinched and pretended they hadn't. Haku cast a hush of mist in narrow lanes where chalk liked to breed. The marks failed to find their corners. Naruto learned to listen not for noise, but for the absence of it, the held breath before a sigil tried to take the room. On the 4th day, chalk scribbles escalated into geometry. A shrine corridor appeared between 2 city blocks where there had never been a shrine and certainly no corridor. Paper charms hung like laundry between poles that hadn't been there yesterday. People avoided it the way you avoid a stranger who acts like they know your name. Repository, Tenten said, squinting. If you had to store very boring, very dangerous homework, where would you put it? Under a very boring, very dangerous prayer, Naruto said. They scouted in the easy hour when the sun had lost its edge and shadows weren't yet full. Hinata sketched guard paths in the dirt with a twig. A handful of calm lines that said more than orders ever did. Haku watched ink carriers come and go, paper tucked under sleeves with reverent wrists. Tenten lay on her stomach behind a rain barrel and measured sightlines with the ends of her hair. Not a smash, she decided. A lift. Locks? Naruto asked. Tenten grinned at him sideways. Doors, she said. They went at midnight. GHT with a sky so clear it looked fragile. The shrine's fence barbs were new and hadn't learned to be mean yet. Naruto ran blue like a thread through the gate's lock, not yanking, coaxing the pins into wanting a different arrangement. The pins sighed and lined up like good soldiers who weren't getting paid enough to fight. The gate opened with a sigh that had opinions. Inside, the repository smell. Like old iron and ink that had never been allowed to dry wrong. Haku's breath rolled cold over the first ward, and the neat strokes of it crawled sluggish before they could complete their thought. Tenten's gloves whispered over hinges. Hinata's eyes counted head turns beyond walls. She named a pause, and Naruto moved in it. They found the silent seal's spine in a drawer labeled with tasteful nothing. Tenten eased the parchment out with chopsticks she'd sanded dull. Haku set it on a flat stone and brushed frost along its edges to stiffen fibers without cracking them. Hinata tipped her head, and described the ink's channels like a river map. Naruto held his palm over the parchment and let his field skim it, a hair's width of distance so gentle even the paper didn't notice it was being courted. This will shut boys like you. Tenten murmured, half in awe, half insulted. If it finishes the sentence. Don't let it talk, Naruto said. They took prints for later, quick repeats on scrap W. ITH misleading doodles between sigils in case anyone snooped. Tenten rolled the originals back with the same pressure the last hands had used. Haku walked backward to brush her breath over invisible tea, rip lines and convince them they had never been touched. Hinata tapped Naruto's wrist when a guard paused too long to scratch his nose and they froze long enough for a moth to land and change its mind. On the way out, Naruto nearly stepped on a boy in a null-sect courier sash asleep behind a pot of mint. He was too young. Naruto's foot hovered. Doors make you choose. He crouched and shook the kid's shoulder gently. Hey, he whispered, your shift ended 10 minutes ago. The kid jerked upright, mortified. The bell. Drink water, Naruto said, because sometimes mercy is letting someone keep their dignity. He flicked a coin into the boy's palm and ghosted away before the apology could complicate things. Back in the dark behind the market, Tenten spread the prints and traced oats with a nail. Anchor points, she muttered. See the pattern? Hinata nodded. Haku folded her hands under her chin and frowned at the circles. Naruto watched the ink while it dried, felt a vibration in his throat like a fish at the end of a line. The pattern wasn't Konoha-shaped. It curved across a map he hadn't seen and yet recognized. Tacky, Haku said. Mountain Pass, Hinata breathed. Tomorrow. Target, Tenten said, jaw hard. A Jinchuriki. Naruto's field tightened before his chest could name. No one answered. There was no need. Her route was marked in the spaces, not the ink. They ed the pass hard enough to make calves complain. The air got thin in a way that made laughs cost. Barbed grass hissed along the slopes. Clouds moved like lumbering animals across ridges and tried to crush smaller weather. The null sect's barrier was a cube made out of regrets. It dropped onto the road with the polite click of something tried 100 times in better conditions. The space inside cupped and settled into boxes with edges so crisp the world flinched. Naruto's infinity stretched for a breath and then snapped into a shape he hadn't asked for. He tasted chalk. Quantized, Tenten said, eyes bright with the interest she only gave difficult problems. They cut your no into geometry. Hinata's hand lifted. Her gaze went far. There's a path, she said. But it's missing pieces. Aku's breath hit a corner and frosted it clean. The frost pattern showed gaps like constellations in reverse. We make pieces, she said. Naruto put a palm out and felt the world agree in squares and disagree everywhere else. He didn't try to break the cube. He tried to be patient. Windows, he said, tiny and timed. We go box to box. He opened the smallest permission he'd ever managed, no wider than a thread. Tenten's coil rattled. She shot her line through 3 boxes and wrapped it around a rock that had taken the trouble to be born in the right place. The line hummed in his field like laughter. Hinata nodded once, set her foot, and moved. Haku slid on a sheen of ice that existed exactly where he led it. A white, short bridge groaned and shattered in the time between 2 blinks. They worked a rhythm. Window, anchor, step. The barrier complained and tried to rename their choices. Naruto kept breathing like a man carrying a sleeping child. The windows stayed small. No room for accidents. They reached the center of the cube in 40 careful seconds. She was tied to a post like a warning and a promise, hair bright green under dust, eyes furious and weirdly delighted. The netting over her shoulders pulsed with dull light. The seals on her wrists bit like small dogs. 7 tails, Naruto asked, as if asking whether she wanted salt. Fu, she corrected, grinning like someone at edge of a cliff who has always liked jumping. You late or am I early? Both, Tenten said, sawing at a knot with a knife that didn't mind being rude. Haku ran a fingertip over the net's pattern. Heat here, cold here, she murmured. And the net sagged and let go like a spiderweb in a sauna. Hinata tapped 3 points at Fu's waist. Breath now, she instructed. Fu did. The last coil loosened. The barrier noticed disobedience and shoved. Boxed air slammed into Naruto's ribs. His field sparked. He dropped to one knee, teeth showing. He forgot to be polite. Door, he gasped. There, now. He made the corridor. Tenten's line sang. Hinata's fingers guided. Haku's frost taxed the math a little more. They got Fu free and shoved her through the next window, the next. Up, Fu said, already laughing. She leapt and tore the air with chakra. Wings unfurled. Not feathers, not paper, light tricked into being useful, 6 radius arcs that caught a wind only she could feel. She didn't so much fly as refused to fall enthusiastically. She streaked to the top of the barrier and kicked it in a way you're not supposed to kick concepts. The cube thrummed, lost a corner, and sulked into collapsing. Naruto held the last window open a fraction longer for Tenten's ankle. She landed and rolled to her feet without finishing a curse. Fu hovered, hair thrashing, eyes bright. Hi, she said, because you have to nail the entrance when new friends are this interesting. Thanks. Welcome, Naruto said, staggering into a grin. Null sect operatives reached the ridge too late to enjoy their own math. They threw slips and watched them flutter in boxless air. Sori was there, 100 meters up the trail, mask off, hair smoother than her conscience. She lowered her hand before the word leave could finish being spelled on her palm. Later, she said to her people. She said it more like an apology than a threat. They ran her off without blood, which is a win hidden inside an incomplete sentence. Fu landed in the road and shook her shoulders like a dog shedding a river. Naruto watched the wings fold into nothing and felt the want to keep them out forever, like wanting the sky to remember a color. Fu caught him looking and winked. You got any spare windows? She asked. Flying through yours felt polite. I charge rent, Tenten said. Pay you in air, Fu said. Best currency. Expires never. Hinata's mouth tipped, which counts as laughing. Haku passed Fu a canteen. Fu drank like it owed her money. A long shadow slid down the road. It wore a bandaged arm and a robe tailored to the shape of ambition, crisp, layered. Perfectly wrong. Danzo, Tenten said under her breath. He didn't bother with lies. He never did when the theater of truth would do. Uzumaki, he said, as if negotiating prices at a fish stall. I offer stability. Your talent draws larger predators. Give me your compliance and I will give you something like peace. The last man who offered me something like peace tried to tattoo me, Naruto said. The day keeps repeating. Danzo's eye moved to Fu and filed her. A root operative gripped a teenager by the neck. Courier sash, too young, mouth set not to cry. Danzo tilted his head and the operative's grip tightened. Sori walked into the scene like a line of ink across clean paper. She looked at Danzo's hand, at the boy's throat under it, and for once you could see her hand decide. She drew a small seal from her sleeve, palmed it like a coin, and slapped it on the operative's elbow. The arm spasmed open as if surprised to find the boy was a person and not a handle. The courier stumbled away, and Sori moved half a step between him and Danzo and no farther. Enough, she said. Danzo watched her like he watches assets misbehave. The work requires. My work requires people, Sori said. She didn't look at Naruto. She didn't blink. If your containment plan begins with a child strangled in a road, your math is wrong. You endanger the village, Danzo said, calm as a ledger. You endanger your soul, she said, and it sounded nothing like piety. Naruto didn't fill the silence. Some moments grow on their own or not at all. Danzo's eye flicked to the arc of rooftops beyond the ridge, to the way wind pressed autumn grass one way and then another, balancing choices. He made his retreat, gather, escalate. He gestured, and root folded back into shadow like knives into sleeves. Sori didn't watch him go. She watched the boy run and then kept watching after he turned a bend. When the dust settled and the world remembered it had trees, she saw. It to Naruto without the pleasure of victory, they will try a band next. Temple scale, Haku said. Over a district, Hinata added. To take him and whoever you're standing next to. Then make it expensive, Tenten said. And rude. It happened 3 days later, at noon, when the market was full of the kind of noise that keeps people from noticing shapes moving on rooftops. Bells rang twice and stuck. Paper along eaves shimmered. Chalk that had been invisible at sunrise remembered itself. A band settled over the Yume district. A shining, static collar, high and wide, no seam visible from the ground. Inside, air tasted like dividers. Outside, people shouted and the sound hit a wall and slid sideways. Naruto felt his field buckle and get told what to be. No, he thought, with none of Gojo's jokes and all of his practice. Not like that. He put his hand out and declared a room. It began the size of a storage closet and then breathed larger, pressing walls out until the market's center found itself inside a calm blue-gray place where sound wore socks and panic had to hang its coat. Lantern strings stilled instead of grinding. A baby hiccuped and did not wail. The boundless room was small and imperfect and his. "Stay with me," he said to a woman clutching a bag of pears. She nodded too quickly and then steadied like a boat in a slip. "Anchors," Hinata called, pupils wide with Byakugan. "Four corners, rooftops, runners." Quote, "Go," Naruto told them, and they did, because the difference between being a team and being four good ideas is knowing who sets the beat. Tenten sprinted toward the southwest corner. Coil spear cradled like a prayer wheel. The band hissed when she reached the rooftop line and tried to quantify her ankles. She grinned and rolled, and Naruto opened a permission window 2 handspans wide at her hip. The spear slid through, rattled light, and locked into a charm-studded pylon with a sound that made 3 pigeons reassess their day. Tenten levered. The pylon groaned the way systems do when an unapproved wrench is applied. Hinata ran north, light foot on awnings that hadn't signed up for this. She reached the next anchor and saw valves, chakra lines braid Ed into not logic, and picked them with gentle fist as if unpicking a collar clasp behind a loved one's neck. Firm, precise, no bruising. The anchor's light dulled to a pulse. Hinata exhaled. "2," she said, "unnecessary," and moved before the word cooled. Haku ghosted east and climbed the external stair with the courtesy of a thief who didn't want to scratch paint. Her breath rolled cold over the anchor's inscription, froze line segments mid-sentence, and locked the script in a bloom of frost that made the chalk whine. She set 2 senbon like hairpins and stepped back. The anchor paused, confused by winter. 3, she said. Fu took the sky with a hoot. She didn't fly straight. She bounced, as if finding the safest thermals could be a game. She skimmed the top edge of the band and whooped when it stung her. Then she pushed chakra into the sting and made it regret knowing her. She dropped on the 4th pylon like a bird that had learned to fold itself into a fist. Her heel hit the capstone. It cracked. 4, she yelled, gleeful, and flicked 3 slips over the edge. Dropping gifts. Sori accepted 1 gift in midair and slapped it onto the roof's lip. She had arrived without sneaking, turned a corner, took a set of stairs, bent under a laundry line, and the wind had decided she belonged. She met Naruto's eyes across 2 rooftops and no walls. "I'll hold," she said, and pressed her palm to the slip. He believed her without liking that he did. The band tightened. It had lost patience with being outnumbered by the variety of their humanness. It tried to take his room away. Naruto felt the tug like a hand on his shirt. He set his feet. "Stay," he told the room. He made it a request that sounded like a promise. It obeyed. He was not a god. He had simply earned this much. Inside, people stopped shaking as if someone had taken their fear and folded it small so it could ride in pockets. An old man sat on a stool and decided not to die today. A kid with a balloon stopped mid-sob, looked up at Naruto, and decided something about adulthood that would last too long. Naruto didn't have time to hope it was the right thing. "Keystone," Hinata called. "South beam." Buried. Naruto ran. Not fast. True. He vaulted a low wall and ducked under a cart with onions. The air smelled like seconds. The keystone sat inside a shrine niche behind a wooden panel that had spent years learning how to be reasonable. He set his hand over the panel and eased blue into the joint like warm oil. The wood yielded without splinters. Behind it, the keystone sulked, a square of slate with lines too neat to be kind. "Red," Tenten warned from 2 roofs away. "Line, not punch." "I know," he said, and meant it. He exhaled a razor, a thread of instruction that told space to make room and stone to stop being stubborn. Red snapped, clean and tight. The keystone popped free like a tooth leaving a gum. Naruto grabbed it, yelped, heat, and held on. His palms burned. Haku's cold slid over his wrists. Domestic as a friend putting a wet cloth where you forgot you had skin. He breathed, nodded thanks, set the keystone down gently instead of throwing it because you don't throw puzzles you're not done reading. The band stuttered. Fu whooped. Hinata struck her last valve. Tenten yanked her spear and the anchor cap popped with the sound of a court consenting. Sori released her slip and step. Back like someone exiting a prayer with dignity. The band lifted a finger's width and then more. It peeled up, sulking, collecting its insulted geometry, and blew away like chalk dust in a courtyard. Being swept for a festival no one would ever admit to having. Silence followed, the good kind. Then life resumed at a volume slightly too high and too grateful. People pretended to go back to buying pears. Tenten leaned on her spear and panted at the sky with a grin like she'd stolen the bell from a temple. Hinata rubbed the pad of her thumb where she'd struck too hard once and would have a bruise for exactly a day. Haku checked Naruto's palms. Blister, she diagnosed, and blew a small frost that made the pain behave. Fu landed in front of him and stuck out her hand. He opened a door without thinking. She hauled him into a hug that would have been a collision if he hadn't cut a hug window in time. "You're fun," she declared into his shoulder. "I'm staying." "That's so," Tenten said, amused and warning. "Yep," Fu said. "Someone needs to say, we, when you all get quiet." Sori stood on the roof beyond them with her hands at her sides. She looked at the place where the band had been in. Then at her palms like they'd lied to her. When she jumped down, she didn't put her hands up like a prisoner. She didn't recite a creed. "I'm done serving men who measure worth by erasure," she said. As if entering a room and speaking the first honest thing. Naruto nodded to the shadow in the corner where Root would have been if Danzo had any courage. "They'll come for you," he said. "No threat. Whether." "I know," she said. She held out an unused charm. Its ink lines broke and then continued, a quiet imperfection built into a circle. "This one's wrong," she said. On purpose. She placed it in his palm, careful. A better mistake. He turned it over. "You can come in," he said, and opened his room, small, warm, human, and let her step through the edge. She hesitated half a heartbeat and then did. The room didn't resist. It learned her weight and let the floor settle. Around them, Konoha remembered how to breathe after almost being collared. Gojo appeared on a stall roof pretending the stall roof was a stage. He applauded exactly twice. The second clap sounded like a coin dropped into a jar labeled later. "Good taste," he said, eyes bright even behind cloth. Rooms. The future of architecture. Kakashi passed by with a bag of oranges and did not stop. "Paperwork," he said to the air. "Hate it." Danzo did not appear. Of course he didn't. He wrote a letter instead and burned it before the ink dried. Because sometimes men like him need to feel decisive even in their own rooms. They cleaned up. Naruto let the room dissolve last, one wall at a time, like taking down festival props. People looked at him as if making calm had been a trick and not a choice. He tried not to hold that look too tight. They regrouped at training ground 3 when the sun pretended to be tired. Fu sprawl. D on the grass and chewed a stem like a cow with opinions. Tenten polished the phase needle while pretending not to be proud of the term, hug window, catching on. Hinata stitched a tear in Naruto's sleeve with identical small, neat movements. Haku poured tea in little cups she'd convinced the shopkeeper to loan her for an afternoon ritual. Naruto stared at his palms. Blisters had collapsed into tender patches. He flexed his fingers and felt the echo of weight. "I was scared," he said, "because naming is a better defense than pretending. That I'd hurt you when it spiked. Or that I'd keep someone out who needed to be in." Hinata set the threaded needle in her lap and rested her knuckles lightly against the back of his hand through a door he'd left unshut. "Fear is a tool," she said. "It shows you where to place your care." Haku sipped her tea. "We're not glass," she said. "If you bruise us, we'll tell you. We'll forgive you, once, if you say sorry like you mean it." Tenten pointed her needle at him like a scolding ant. "And then buy dumplings." "Obviously," Fu said. "I'm already eating yours." Sori sat on the low wall, straight-backed, hands folded, watching a wind stir leaves. The slit in her certainty looked recent and raw. She did not apologize for the shape of her life before noon. She did not ask for acceptance like a prize. She sat in there quiet and listened like a person who might, tomorrow, be useful. Naruto leaned back until the tree's bark pressed a pattern into his shoulders. Above the branches, a sliver of moon auditioned for relevance. He closed his eyes and found the edges of his room in his chest. The wall that held noise outside without contempt, the breath that made a floor, the door that could open as fast as a hand. Boundless, he said under his breath, trying the word on. Say it louder, and it'll get cocky, Tenten warned. Say it again, and it'll get real, Hinata countered. He didn't say it again. He didn't need to. The village had heard it when the band lifted. Even if it didn't have a name for it yet. The wind shifted with the season. Pigeons did their idiot loop and landed on a roof that didn't mind. Somewhere in a basement, a Danzo plan metastasized. Somewhere above that, men in masks perfected ways to pretend they weren't tired. Somewhere higher still, a piece of sky shivered, not from weather but from attention, the way a Tantio N makes a stage before the actor arrives. Gojo pushed his blindfold up for a breath and squinted at that too bright point in the heavens as if reading a menu. He didn't say anything clever. He let the cloth fall and went to buy onigiri and pay for them like a civilian. Night slid over Konoha like a blanket smoothed by hands that wanted to be gentle. Naruto sat with his people and let his field down, and to the point where a mosquito could get away with being alive. He thought of Chalk making boxes and Doors making jokes of them. He thought of Sori's charm with the deliberate flaw and put it in his pocket like a pebble from a river he liked. He lay on his back and let the earth hold his weight while he figured out where to put it next. Tomorrow would bring the letter Hiruzen couldn't refuse to open. Tomorrow would teach Fu where the grocery stalls sold the best oranges. Tomorrow would show Sori how it felt to be hunted by the thing she had fed. Tomorrow would find the sect without a band and very angry. And Danzo with fewer friends and more secrets. Tomorrow would whisper of someone walking down a staircase of light and trying to balance a ledger with people in it. Tonight, the room had been enough. He had drawn a door in a wall that wasn't there and let the village step through it without asking what it owed him. He fell asleep smiling at the idea that a hug could be engineered and still count. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Heaven's Ledger and the Error Called Naruto. The sky broke with tidy manners. It didn't roar or split like a wound. It clicked, neat as a bead on a string, and a stairway unrolled from nothing. Light hammered into steps so exact they made the clouds around them feel cheap. On the highest roof of the sect's grand shrine, robed elders stopped mid-chant. The UNGEST acolyte dropped his ink brush and watched a line of black arc across a perfect floor, a mistake that would have gotten him beaten yesterday. Today no one hit him. They forgot how. A man descended. Man was a generous word. He wore a robe that swallowed shadow and gave it back corrected. His hair fell like an argument that didn't need to be raised. His gaze moved as if you were a margin note in a holy text and he was deciding whether to keep you. The sect bowed because it is hard not to when the air bows first. Otsutsuki Shionen, said the eldest, a voice polished by a lifetime of being agreed with. He meant, forgive our lateness, accept our worship, fix what is wrong with the world. We are ready to assist your audit. Shionen looked at him, and the space he occupied made a soft subtraction sound. There was no body to bury. The elder became absence you could count, the way a missing stair changes how a staircase feels. Acolytes screamed and clapped hands over their mouths because say screaming in a shrine is bad manners and the body's need to make a noise doesn't ask first. The bravest looked for a seal to throw. No seal is built to catch a thought like that. Danzo arrived a ETH later with root snapping into view like opened knives. He stood at the shrine's lip and calculated how much was efficient. We can deliver the boy, he said, pleasant. And his circle. In exchange, Shionen tilted his head. The gesture made the cloud under him correct its fluff. Your exchange, he said mildly, is irrelevant. His gaze passed once over Danzo and then forgot him with the mercy of indifference. The sect dropped to both knees after their elder's subtraction finally finished echoing. Sori did not kneel. She had trained to kneel better than anyone. Her legs would not. Shish. He stood at the edge of the dais and felt the prayer slip inside her sleeve heat like a fever and then cool. Where is the error? Shionen said, hands folded, as if asking for a file. The shrine's roof cracked along a chalk line, and the crack arranged itself into a road pointing to Konoha. Naruto was teaching his room how to breathe when the first shadow fell across the training ground. The boundless room was small and unspectacular. It smelled like grass and chalk and tea someone had spilled on dirt and wiped up badly. It took the noise and tucked it away without strangling it. Hinata stepped in and let her shoulders drop. Tenten crashed through the edge like a dare and didn't get bruised. Haku sat cross-legged with her palms up and watched condensation form on the border the way a craftsman watches varnish dry, patiently. Pleased, ready to sand and apply again. Fu lay on her back and kicked the air, wings unfurled because joy prefers the sun. The shadow cut the light cleanly across the grass and the room shivered. Naruto's spine knew the shape before his eyes did. He turned and the staircase was already there, ridiculous and personal, descending out of a piece of sky that had memoed its intent. New pen pal, Tenten said, light, because someone had to touch a joke to earth or it would float away. Looks like an auditor, Fu said cheerfully. I hate auditors. Shionen stepped off the last stair. The grass under his feet decided to be flatter. He took in the ground, the people, the boy with whisker marks and a room he shouldn't own. His gaze landed on Naruto and the air remembered math. Infinite distance without measurable energy, Shionen said, curious like a man reading a footnote aloud. Badly behaved, but charming. People, Naruto said, because he had learned to start conversations with the topic and not the theat. Before you do whatever you're here to do, registered or not, there are people behind me. Shionen's head tilted a fraction, interest flickering. Noted. He raised one hand and wrote a circle in the air. Space inside it sagged. The boundless room's wall rippled like a curtain brushed by a hand you didn't want. Naruto felt the tug like teeth in cloth. He stepped forward without thinking. Infinity rose by reflex. It failed. It didn't even have the decency to explode. It just simplified, like a fraction reduced to a boring part. The endless stretch between him and everything flattened to zero with bureaucratic grace. The space in front of Shionen turned into a rule that did not include Naruto. Pain stamped Naruto's ribs with a neat seal. He tasted copper. Haku grabbed his elbow. Permission was already open. She didn't bounce. She hissed when she felt the wrongness in his field. Null domain, she said. He writes the page before you get a pen. Fu kicked to a hover and immediately dropped 2 meters, wings shuddering like birds flying into a glass door. She blinked. Rude, she observed, offended on behalf of flight. Fall back, Kakashi's voice said from the perimeter, nowhere and everywhere. He hadn't stepped in because he understood the shape of this problem. Knives don't help with equations until later, when the person holding the chalk is tired. Naruto breathed and forced his brain to go slow. Infinity wasn't gone, it had been pinned. He could feel it, humming quietly like a radio when a station's been taken over by static. Kurama stirred, old and hot, offering a river. No, Naruto said aloud, not to the fox. To himself. Shionen took one step, effortless, and distance agreed to be less. Naruto moved. Not fast, honest, and opened a door the size of an eyelash to the side. It remained open. Shionen noticed because of course he did. Local exception, he said, pleased. Good craft. Bad policy. Policy, Naruto echoed. Because if he started screaming he would not stop. The god who loves policies. I like ledgers, Shionen said. They are a kind of mercy. Tenten snorted. Then you're bad at mercy. Shionen glanced, and Tenten's phase needle, raised, humming, decohered into a suggestion, less solid than a rumor. She swore in 3 languages and patted it as if that would persuade reality to remember. Retreat, Hinata said calmly. Fingers light on Naruto's sleeve. He'd opened that door long ago and never closed it. Her touch burned, not from heat, from context. Not far, Naruto said. Just. He hauled breath into a shape and cast his room like a tent, not at Shionen but behind them, around people. His hands trembled. The room held. Inside it, a toddler hiccuped twice and then only hiccuped once. Shionen watched with the detached admiration of a craftsman witnessing a novice do something wrong in a beautiful way. I will remove you, he said, like a man promising to take a staple out of a page without tearing it. He stepped, and the world chose his pace over the sun's. Naruto cut a permission window under Shionen's foot, the tiniest stumble in a perfect stride, and slid left. A blad. E of wind passed where his throat had been. He bled anyway, a thin line on his cheek. It stung with honesty. They ran, not like cowards, like people placing the next fight where it wouldn't crush a fruit cart. The first refuge was the old lecture hall with the broken eaves. Naruto threw the room against the walls and turned it from a nice idea into shelter. Sound dulled. The breath of 30 strangers, caught in the vibrato of panic. Flattened into something manageable, he treats infinity like a number in need of simplification, Hinata said, already looking at Naruto's field like it was a map of a city under siege. He makes your no into a clean zero. Then don't be static, Tenten said, grabbing a charcoal stub and sketching a mess of doors and arrows on the floorboards. You wrote a wall. Write a seam. Stitch it. If he flattens it, you move the seam. Haku cleaned the cut on Naruto's cheek with a cloth she chilled between fingers. You will burn, she said evenly. We will keep you from cooking yourself. Fu crouched, wings collapsing and re-spreading, testing what air he'd left her. I can bounce between your seams, she said. Call vectors. If the room can hear me, we can keep civilians from slamming into the wrong side. They looked at Sori, because now even their assumptions had learned to check with her. She had come inside without asking and the room hadn't stung. She set a small scroll on her knees and unrolled it to show a string of circles, some broken, some whole. Translation, she said, Byakugan sees flow. My seal writes it into your edges without lag. She touched 2 points. Here and here I put imperfection on purpose. When he flattens the field, the flaws remain and give you purchase. Naruto swallowed. He had 3 heartbeats to decide and none to wonder if he was worthy. That was a question for slower days. Okay, he said, and all the planning, all the playful doors and hug windows, all the jokes, they were the body of something that could stand now. He lifted his hands. Permission, he told reality, today and tomorrow. Not forever. Hold only as long as it helps. He built the room different. Not a bubble, a weave. He knotted threads where Hinata pointed. Thin places he could thicken and thin at will. He let Tenten's phase needle slide through designated eyelets and paused it without tearing. He pulled Haku's cold into seams, Ling points where he would run to and die. He opened wide corridors above for Fu and carved tiny ones for feet, for knees, for hands. He let Sori stitch seals at the edge that didn't finish their thoughts. So Shionen would step into them and wonder why he felt clumsy for half a breath. Gojo stood at the door like a teacher watching his kid build a fort in a classroom that was not meant for forts. He didn't clap. He didn't grin. His blindfold made his face clean of all the usual mischief. You good? He asked. No, Naruto said, and because he said it, some of the fear leaked into the floor instead of his throat. But I'm better. Quote, good answer, Gojo said, and flicked a charm on Sori's lap with a finger. Nice ink. Thank you, Sori said before remembering she didn't need his approval to breathe. Shionen entered without touching the door. Walls agreed to be farther apart. His domain fell like a lid on a box. Clean, decisive, rude. The boundless weave sagged and then thrummed, fighting resonance with harmony. The toddler in the corner stopped hiccuping. A woman wrapped her scarf tighter and didn't know why she had decided to trust air. Remove yourself, Shionen said to Naruto, and there was no malice. That made it worse. I have people, Naruto said. I pass. Shionen moved with boring grace, and the world slid aside to accommodate him. Naruto couldn't outwall him. He outwove him. He opened a seam as Shionen's foot came down. He closed one a finger width from Tenten's hip. He let a corridor breathe for Fu and then cinched it as a blade of null cut through where her wing would have been. She laughed in his ear. Closer, she sang. You can be ruder. Hinata's hand was an anchor on his sleeve, her eyes moving faster than they had ever been allowed. Left thread is thinning, she said, and he thickened it. Valve there, she said, and he pinched it. Her voice never rose. The room followed. It recognized her authority and made room for it. Haku turned the edges of Shionen's domain into winter. Not destroying, slowing, the way a frost delays a flowering and tricks a gardener into triumph. Shionen looked down with interest. He had never been slowed by courtesy before. Tenten's needle zipped through 2 of Sori's flawed seals, became more real in their presence, and tapped Shionen's sleeve. He moved 1 centimeter off his ideal. He did not like it. The fight stopped being about who could push harder. It became music. Shionen raised a hand and wrote a curve into the room. Naruto let it land in a seam he had no intention of keeping and cut it loose. Shionen flattened a wall. Naruto converted a wall into a door. Shionen simplified the distance between Naruto's eyes and his throat. Naruto extended it between Shionen's feet just enough to slur stride into stumble. Red, Tenten said, conversational, tracking lines only she could love. Line 2, nothing dumb. Blue, Hinata corrected, under his heel, then collapse. Haku whispered, now. Fu shouted from above, now. Naruto pulled blue in a razor thread along the line Hinata cited and then snapped red in a pulse so narrow it felt like a paper cut. The two met and braided, not the old violent purple, not a careless apocalypse. A corridor-only beam, hollow horizon, spat between seams, the room holding the path tight so it wouldn't chew anything except what it was told. It grazed Shionen's forearm. It cut nothing visible. He looked at his sleeve. The fabric dusted away as if embarrassed at having been wrong for so long. Shionen's eyes lifted to Naruto and for the first time held not curiosity but attention. An acceptable improvement, he said. Then he dropped his domain fully. Sound left the room. Color became category. Naruto's infinity flattened so thoroughly the memory of it hurt. Every seam screamed and tried to become a straight line. He did not try to hold the whole room. He held a hand's width of it. He let Gojo's patient training burn his panic down to a thin wick. He listened for Hinata's breath. He found it and built around it. The room bent into a shape that matched her pace. Here, Hinata said, sharp for once, and Naruto threw a door open where her voice ended. Tenten's needle leapt through and pinned the exact spot the domain's curve wanted. Haku set a frost pattern on that pin and it held. Fu bounced off the top seam and called 3 vectors at once, trusting him to hear the one he needed. He did. Sori's wrong circles glowed at the corners and the false imperfections refused correction. They gained a foothold, then another. The room hummed. It was no longer a tent. It was a thing growing bones. Naruto stepped forward within his own room and something in the posture of Shionen's body changed. He made the rare face of a man for whom subtraction had failed to remove enough. Permission. Naruto told him softly. 1 corridor. That's all you get. He opened it. Narrow, cruel, humane. A path from himself to Shionen that did not touch a shelf of B. Owls or the baby or Haku's frost lattice or the corner where a girl clutched her grandmother's scarf. Shionen took it. Why wouldn't he? He didn't believe in traps he hadn't ridden. Naruto braided blue, E and red in that corridor and turned them into hollow horizon again. Not the blunt hollow purple Gojo used when the world needed holes. This was a scalpel slice through an arrow slit. He burned his palms. He smelled his own skin cooking and did not drop the braid, because Hinata's fingers were on his sleeve and that meant he remembered to be brave. The beam licked Shionen's shoulder and did not shatter a wall a meter away. It didn't need to. It satisfied math. Shionen's head turned. Interest became calibration became surprise. He lifted a hand to erase the surprise and found his fingers moving slower than he'd wanted. Haku's frost. Again, Tenten said. Naruto couldn't. The braid had eaten the meat of his hands and the edges of his focus. The room dipped. He caught it with his heel and a stupid grin. Don't you dare fall. Old friend. Fu dropped, met the floor on a skid of light and laughter, and shot past him, slapping Sori's translation seal harder against a seam. Hinata took 1/2 step forward. She didn't strike Shionen. She struck the edge of the domain with gentle fist. There, where the foreign rule had threaded itself into Konoha's air. The hit was small. It mattered. The world remembered itself, a fraction. Shionen's null domain flickered. It didn't fail. It learned they were not alone. Gojo did nothing whatsoever except stand in the wrongest place and look proud. Hee-haw. D taught Naruto the trick of pushing while laughing. Naruto was not laughing. He didn't need to. He had friends now who laughed for him. Shionen reached, finally annoyed. The reach ate the little distance between a hand and Naruto's throat. Naruto put his burned palm up and made a door inside pain. The hand stopped a hair from skin. Not because infinity had returned to its lazy old perfection, Beck. Oz he granted permission exactly where he chose and nowhere else. A seam, not a wall. That is a better policy, Shionen said quietly. Thanks, Naruto panted, wrecked, and smiled with his teeth. This is a people-first room. Shionen stood still for the space of 2 heartbeats. Then he made a decision like a stamp. He tried to lift the lid of his domain higher, to press the room flat so he could finish this neatly. The boundless room didn't collapse. It lifted with it, not a fight, a counter-offer. It became a balcony on top of a lid. Civilians felt a breeze and smiled and didn't know why. The baby hiccuped once, laughed, and reached for a dust mote. Shionen's gaze went to that reach. It always comes down to what you do when a hand goes out, and the tiniest crack formed in the perfect line of his mouth. He stepped back. The lid lifted. The domain thinned. He did not bow. He did something much ruder. He understood them. This village, he said, voice flat, has built an error into its structure. He flicked his fingers and the staircase reassembled itself in the sky with a bored click. It will propagate. Good, Tenten said, wiping soot off her cheek. We like teaching. Haku's frost melted into quiet water. Fu flopped onto her back and flapped a hand at the ceiling like a wave to a departing train that had failed to be rude enough. Sori exhaled like a woman who had been holding her breath for a year and finally convinced her own ribs to stop. Shionen placed his palm against the edge of Naruto's room and felt nothing except something he had not accounted for, a policy that allowed people in. Boundless, Shionen said, tasting the word as if it offended him. A poor name. Too romantic. Got a better one? Naruto asked, because he had learned that picking a fight with God over semantics is how you love your own mortality well. Shionen looked up at the staircase, where the sky waited, patient and inevitable. No, he said, only an audit note. He walked up into light and was gone. The stairs clicked shut between breaths. The sky remembered how to be unambitious. The sect fell apart the way floods do when someone removes the dam's last respectable plank, silently for a moment. Then with a sound like shame, the elders began arguing again. The acolytes laid down their charms because no one was looking. Two mid-level functionaries threw up in unison and decided to go home. Sori stood on the shrine's roof and watched her institution tilt into ruin. She didn't smile. She did not mourn. She lifted a hand to block the sun and then lowered it because she no longer had to wait for permission to shade her eyes. Danzo tried to step into the space Shionen had vacated and found it shaped like a man he could not be. The letter he wrote that night was elegant and unsendable. He burned it and stared at his bandaged arm and thought unwanted thoughts about subtraction. Konoha didn't cheer. It didn't know how. It cooked. The market shook ash out of produce basket. ETS and sold pears like pears hadn't almost been categorized. Children played a game where they jumped across chalk lines and argued about whether the lines counted if a friend said they didn't. The room breathed out and let itself go. Naruto's palms blistered, cooling. Haku pressed her cold to one, then the other, gentle as hand at the nape of a neck. Stupid, she said, fond, and wrapped them. Effective. Tenten crouched and lifted his left hand carefully. My needle lived, she announced, trying not to sound like she cared about his skin more than her toy. And so did you. Hug window. He opened one. She bumped her forehead against his shoulder and then stood quickly because if she lingered she might have had to invent a joke to hide a feeling and she was tired. Fu rolled to her stomach and propped her chin on her hands. You know the best part, she said to the dirt. We didn't crush anyone while we were being incredible. That's the work, Hinata said. She hadn't stopped touching his sleeve, light, steady. In the clean quiet after a fight, you can hear the difference between pity and respect. Naruto tasted respect and let it make him greedy for the right things. Gojo arrived. D leaped to his own pride and resisted the urge to throw an arm around Naruto's neck because permission is not a theory. He stood with his hands in his pockets and looked out over a village he did not own and loved anyway, in his way. I'm proud, he said softly, as if telling the sky a secret. Not of the win, of the way you did it. Naruto didn't turn. He didn't need to. You teach weird, he said, thick with exhaustion and grin. It stuck. Tragic, Gojo said easily. Let's get noodles. You're paying, Tenten said at once. Obviously, Gojo said. I live to fund your ridiculous appetites. They left the hall like a family that hadn't learned the word yet. Sori lingered by the door and closed it with a care that belonged in a different life. Naruto paused beside her. You can come by, he said. When you want, or when it's bad, there's room. He didn't capitalize the word. He didn't need to. She heard it. I'll bring math, she said. I'll bring doors, he said. They ate bad noodles that tasted like relief and salt. Naruto tried to hold chopsticks with wrapped hands and made a mess. Hinata took one bowl and held it while he slurped, and if anyone had anything to say about it, he room he carried around with him now had a rule about strangers interrupting kindness. Evening found them at the Hokage monument because big days end there even when you promise yourself you're going to do something different. The wind had dropped its shopkeeper mood and was willing to be wild again. Konoha glittered without trying. Sasuke was there already, leaning against the fourth face, eyes on nothing in particular. Jaw unclenched. Sakura sat cross-legged with a book open and her finger marking a line she hadn't turned yet. They lifted their chins in a hello that said we heard, we kept breathing, we will not make a fuss. Tenten flung a paper airplane. Naruto opened a door to let it pass and then shut it so it paused and then let it go again. She laughed without being loud. Haku set 2 cups on the stone and poured tea out of a small pot she had produced from nowhere like respect for small rituals. Fu teetered on the very edge, toes over the drop, and made the wind practice catching her without committing to it. Hinata sat next to Naruto, close enough for their shoulders to touch and for the scent of tea and antiseptic in her to make a triangle with his breath. He leaned, just enough to make it a decision. She leaned back. People kept their breath because of you, she said, not poetic. Because of us, he corrected. She nodded. After a minute, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded square. She unfolded it. A line drawing of his room, 4 walls, a door, a thin seam sketched with the care of someone who had memorized it with eyes too careful to be ordinary. Name it later, she said. Let it be right first. He took the paper, careful not to smudge it with wrapped palms. Okay. He looked at the village, then at the sky where the staircase had been. And the quiet that lived quietly in his chest now, the one that tasted like responsibility and not like a leash, filled up 3 ribs and asked to stay. Kurama stirred. He had been quiet during the fight. Offended by elegant calculus and unimpressed by men who make lids. Naruto gave the fox a thought shaped like a door propped open for a friend who needed a porch in an hour. The fox huffed, disrespectful. Then, very slow, allowed the porch. You look older, Sakura said, not teasing, simply seeing. I feel burnt, Naruto said. Good, Sasuke said without malice. Better than hollow. Ey sat until the stars punctured the dark. Gojo disappeared before the first one came out because some men know when to leave a room they helped decorate. Sori came and stood at the base of the monument and didn't climb. She watched the lights. Not ready yet. Aloud. Down in the market, stall owners swept chalk out of cracks. A kid drew a circle on a wall and then crossed it with a line, giggling. His mother told him not to waste chalk and then smiled because the circle looked like nothing for once. Tomorrow, there would be soup and paperwork and Donzo's silent fury and the sect's petition to remain useful as inspectors of lesser. Safer things like bridges and boilers. Tomorrow, Fu would discover the plum vendor who saved the sweetest ones for regulars and decide to become one. Tomorrow, Sori would show up with a bad map and a confession that sounded like a proposal, teach me to break my old math. Tomorrow, Willow Ward would send a message from a village 3 days away saying the AIM band had tried to settle there and had found the walls already breathing differently. Tomorrow, Gojo would dangle his feet off a roof, look at a different patch of sky, and wonder if the staircase had cousins who liked to be on time. He would laugh when it did not arrive, because delayed gods are his favorite. Tonight, Naruto drew a door on the air with his bandaged finger and didn't open it. He just drew it so his body would know where to find it if he needed to. Hinata watched the gesture and put her hand, light, steady, over his. It didn't pass through the air like a trick. It just rested. He led it home, he said to the village. Not throne, not domain, room. Hinata nodded and said nothing, which made it true. A night wind came up from the river and combed the roofs. The monument breathed. The chalk dust left under his nails finally wore off. Down in the empty lecture hall, his room remembered a shape it had been and refused to forget it overnight. A ledger somewhere far above closed with a soft thump. The clerk who held it frowned at a tiny stain on the last page and rubbed it. The stain did not go away. The clerk put the book back on the shelf and marked the spine with a little tag that meant check again later. The shelf tilted a fraction and didn't fall. Naruto leaned his head against the stone behind him, felt the day settle into his muscles, and chose to sleep without flinching. Chapter 5 End.